France has re-elected its president. Will voters give him a majority? Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard.
And I'm Mark Perlman. Welcome to France 24's election night coverage. All 577 seats at the National Assembly are up for grabs. In exactly 1 hour, polls will close and we'll bring you first estimates with Diptyka Laurent. And among the races we're watching,
Emmanuel Macron's new Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, running for the first time. Delano de Souza reports.
Alison Sargent is in the northern town of Hénin-Beaumont, where far-right leader Marine Le Pen is running for re-election.
Cole Stangler in the southern port city of Marseille, where Manuel Bompard hopes to fill the seat of left-wing leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
And in the Riviera resort of Saint-Tropez, Alexander Alcott is covering the bid of far-right pundit Éric Zemmour.
James Andre is watching tight races here in the French capital, where the incumbent carried it in the first round of the presidential election, only by 5 points over Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
And with us to count down to the top of the hour, we have on our set journalist Léa Chambozel, who is the host of the French politics podcast Popol. Welcome.
Good evening.
Also on the show, Annabelle Lever, who is a professor of political philosophy at Sciences Po in Paris. Welcome. And last but not least, he's a pollster, data scientist, Rémi Louf. Welcome to you. Good evening.
Mark, some pollsters predicting a record abstention rate. 1 hour to go. Is it looking that way?
Absolutely. The pollsters were right. Let's look at the estimate for the abstention from our partner Ipsos. You can see it on your screen. 52.8%. This is 1.5% more than in 2017, where it was already a record. Just to give you an idea, this is twice as much abstention as in the recent presidential election.
Well, let's begin with Delano de Souza, who joins us here in Paris following the campaign of new Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne.
That's right, Francois. It's wait-and-see mode here to see how the French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne does tonight. Now, the Ensemble, or Together coalition, has fielded some 450 candidates in these legislative elections, and they will be looking to grab at least 289 out of those 577 seats in the French National Assembly. Now, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, needs that majority in the parliament if he is to push through his reforms, which he has promised, things like reforming the country's pension system. As you mentioned, it will be interesting to see how Elisabeth Borne fares tonight, considering she has never run for elected office here in France. She's running from the 6th constituency of the region of Calvados. It'll also be interesting to see how Damien Abad, who's the Minister of Solidarity, fares, considering his appointment created quite an outcry as he is accused of rape. Plus, it will be interesting to see how the Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, performs. Under his watch, we have seen police tactics become increasingly heavy-handed here in France. Police tactics which, in fact, made international headlines last month during the Champions League final between Real Madrid and Liverpool.
Many thanks, Delano de Souza. We'll be crossing back to you throughout.
And now we're heading north to the small town of Hénin-Beaumont. This is where Marine Le Pen was elected in 2017. Alison Sargent is in Hénin-Beaumont. How are things looking for the far-right leader?
Well, Mark, I'm at a community center on the outskirts of Hénin-Beaumont, a place that hosts, among other things, a local sewing club. The setup for Marine's speech later on tonight really looks like the setup for an outdoor backyard wedding. It's a very local vibe, a very casual vibe, emphasizing Marine Le Pen's image of accessibility and proximity to her voters. They are starting to arrive. It's an elderly crowd, a lot of families. I spoke to a couple, a retired truck driver and an unemployed cook. They were pretty subdued. They know that the legislative elections don't tend to favor their party. They're unhappy with the winner-takes-all voting system, but they are hoping to see Marine Le Pen elected tonight, right off the bat, in the first round. They also hope to see the National Rally finally get past that 15-seat threshold to form a group at the National Assembly, and in their words, finally have to be listened to.
Alison Sargent, thank you very much. We'll check with you later once the results are in.
Some 1,000 kilometers away from that community center where Alison's reporting from is Alexander Alcott in the Riviera resort of Saint-Tropez. It's another far-right candidate who's running. TV pundit Eric Zemmour.
Yeah, it's a hard job, but someone has to do it. I've been braving the sweltering conditions here in southern France, and the heat is on quite a lot for Eric Zemmour, with some feeling that if he doesn't do well here, he's fighting for his political survival in some ways, following the disappointment in the presidential race. Speaking to some of his supporters just round the corner, where he's going to be speaking from when those results come in a little after 8 o'clock, they're saying that they were disappointed by those results in the presidential race, and they feel like he is the only candidate who diagnoses the problems well that France has. And to hint at what they're talking about, that meeting is taking place in front of a restaurant called Chez Nous, our place, because his platform is, of course, that he is speaking about France for the French and things like this. Some people wondering why he is running all the way down here in the south of France, because he's based up in Paris. Naturally, as he went around this morning, he spent his morning going around the various voting centres. But we know already that one vote that he won't be getting is for himself. He won't be doing the classic voting shot of him putting his own ballot in his own ballot box, because he's not even registered here in the constituency where he's running. He's actually up in Paris. He's countered that, saying that he spends his summers down here, and this is like a second home for him. But the real reason perhaps is this in the presidential election, where he got just a smidge over 7%, here he actually got 15%. So if it's a case of the song about New York, slightly, if he can't make it here, he can't make it anywhere.
All right, we'll see if Saint-Tropez likes carpetbaggers in some 53 minutes' time. Thank you for that, Alexander Alcott.
Right, and let's come back to here, to the French capital. You have a lot of tight races predicted. James Andre joins us from Paris. James.
Yes, absolutely. Paris, a battleground, and we are seeing behind me probably that we're having a bit of a last-minute rush here after very, very low turnout. Indeed, the president of this polling station was telling me earlier on that they expect to arrive at around 50%, like in line with national turnout. But she said that, for example, in the presidential election, they were between 70 and 72% at this stage. So, yeah, low turnout. We've been to several polling stations today, and they were very, very calm indeed. Now, you're saying, yes, Paris, a battleground, of course, between, of course, the presidential party and the left-wing new coalition, the NUPES, and with a few races to watch. 3 of them include actual newly appointed ministers who will lose their jobs if they do not win. And yes, there are 221 candidates running in the whole of Paris for 18 seats, and quite a few of those battles have been pretty harsh indeed.
James Andre reporting from Paris. As James mentioned, some 15 ministers are running in this election, and they know the deal. If they lose, they're out of government. And we already have the estimates for one of them, the junior minister for Maritime Affairs, Justine Bénin, who is running in the overseas region of Guadeloupe. And she is in potential trouble despite finishing first with 31.3% of the vote. Her challenger is behind 26.8% on the left, Christian Baptiste. So it will be very interesting to see if she survives.
And just a question on that, Mark. When we look at that number there, you saw the third place candidate, 14.9%, but won't be going to the runoff because
there is a rule. You need to get 12.5% of registered voters, and if you have a very high abstention, you just don't make the cut. And this will happen in most of the races, those 577 races we're following.
Abstention rate running around 75% in Guadeloupe.
And we're now going to head south to Marseille, the port city of Marseille, at the headquarters of Jean-Luc Mélenchon's top lieutenant, Emmanuel Bompard. Cole Stangler is standing by. Cole, what's the mood around you?
Well, the mood is pretty positive for La France Insoumise and the NUPES left-wing coalition. This is a district that, of course, Mélenchon has represented since 2017. He's not running for re-election. This time around says that he wants to be prime minister if the left ultimately gets a majority in parliament. In any case, this is become something of a bastion for the left in recent years. Mélenchon got more votes here in Marseille than any other presidential candidate. It's a big city. It's a diverse city. In many ways, a working class city and one with lots of inequality. So if the left is going to have a good score tonight nationally, we're almost certainly going to have a good score coming out of Marseille here.
Cole Stengler will keep talking to you during this night because it's going to be very interesting in Marseille for sure.
In 2017, Emmanuel Macron had never before run for office. He blew up France's traditional political landscape by stealing the thunder of the big tent center-left and center-right parties. Now, after April's presidential election, will the parliamentary polls confirm the emergence of three blocs, far-right, hard-left, and a grand centrist coalition in the middle? Monty Francis has more.
It's sometimes called the third round of France's presidential election, as voters elect members of the National Assembly. President Macron is fighting to hold on to a majority with his centrist coalition called Ensemble, or Together, but that could easily change. And that's exactly what Macron's former presidential rival, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, is counting on. The new left-wing coalition is referred to as the NUPES, or the New Popular Union. They're determined to take over the majority in parliament. The France Unbowed leader hopes achieving this will get him the job of prime minister.
If we win, it is our program that will be applied and no other. Nothing will be negotiated with the head of state except the will to reach the most reasonable solutions.
If it isn't able to win a majority, the New Popular Union is looking to become the main opposition force in parliament, replacing Les Républicains on the right. The party is still reeling from Valérie Pécresse's catastrophic loss in the presidential election. Analysts say the party could lose 30 to 50% of seats in the upcoming vote. Another party to have suffered a defeat during April's election, Marine Le Pen's National Rally. Its members are hoping to win enough seats to stay politically relevant.
I will lead the battle in the National Assembly, fighting against Emmanuel Macron's toxic policy, and I hope to do so with as many MPs as possible, and that's the responsibility of the voters.
The party is being challenged by Eric Zemmour's Reconquest Party. Marine Le Pen's camp is looking to avoid a divided vote on the far right, which would weaken the National Rally's position.
It's election night on France 24. They're still voting in major cities. Polls have closed in smaller towns. Here you see images of one polling station here in the French capital.
Léa Chamoncel, this has been a weird campaign, if you will. First of all, it's been unusually long between the presidential election and tonight, 7 weeks, but it's been rather strange, no?
I don't know if strange is the right word. It was
unusual,
interesting.
Let's put it this
unusual,
way.
Yeah, but any campaign is unusual. In 2017, it was unusual because Socialist Party, that was one of the favorite parties, was actually already collapsing. It's even worse now, obviously. The presidential campaign was quite interesting and unusual. What's very interesting is that we're getting back at where we were with La République En Marche. What I'm saying is that La République En Marche in 2017 came up with the big storytelling behind the construction of the party that was, we're going to put new faces in the parliament. We're going to have people from the civil society and we're going to make politics differently. What we see today is that they're actually investing people from other parties such as the Socialist Party, Les Républicains, and also lots of people. Over 50% of the MPs from La République En Marche are running again. So this promise of making a new society with new faces is over. And I think the enthusiasm behind the campaign and behind the campaign of what Emmanuel Macron was trying to bring into the election in 2017 and what he did actually is over now in 2022. The hope for the people who do you want to vote for? This is the main question that you actually ask yourself when you go to vote. The vote is like, what do you vote for and who do you vote for? What is the programs? Like, we hardly discussed it during the campaign. And what was the most important to the people is rather who. And who now, for lots of people, is I want to see someone in the National Assembly that is linked to my realities, that looks like me in a way, and also understands what are my struggles and understands what are my claims. What we see today, unfortunately, is that there again, the new parties, also the coalition, the left coalition, didn't really manage to give this hope to the people. And the abstention rate is also this. The question is, who do we want to be deciding for us? When you see a country in which every other day women are killed, and you see that women are underrepresented, when you see a country where you have people that are discriminated, extremely discriminated, and not being able to be represented in the National Assembly, we have to ask ourselves, where is the emergency? The emergency today is that everyone is well represented and well protected. The thing is that what we see today is that the main decisions that have impacts on the most of the population aren't decided by these people. They're not represented properly. So I think if people don't go and vote, it's because they don't see into voting a political answer to what they struggle with every day.
All right, Rémi Louf, let me ask you. Obviously, there is something new in this campaign. Is Jean-Luc Mélenchon saying after the presidential election, "I want you to elect me prime minister," and this has changed the dynamics. Yes, there is a lot of abstention, but still, this has reshuffled the cards.
It's really funny because every time you talk about politics and you're completely outside the data, people actually tell you, oh, this is very special and this election is very special and something is really happening. But when you look at the dynamics, in a sort of non-passionate way, I have my opinions, but trying to put them aside and just look at the numbers, kind of the same things are happening, from one campaign to another. If you just look at the numbers, like, for instance, a very simple model for this election, when you look at the Français de l'étranger, is just to sum the score that Mélenchon, Jadot, and Hidalgo did in this circumscription. So it's actually a very simple thing. And the models in themselves don't really change for us from one election to another. So the political landscape in France is very specific compared to the US, for instance, because the parties constantly change. Like you have new parties. You have LREM that just appeared out of nowhere 5 years ago. And yet, the underlying trends are always the same, and what we assume in our models is that you have these trends that, go under the political landscape of France, and these parties are sort of emanating out of this, coming out of this underground strength. And I'm not saying this is the truth, but this is good enough to make predictions based on past elections and, using the data, the polling data that we have for the current election. So,
Annabelle, how does that mesh with your research? Is France changing or is France the same?
Well, I wanted to come to this thing about campaigns because when I was at the University of Rochester, there was a brilliant graduate student, now a brilliant professor somewhere in the States, Lynn Vavrick, who used to work on political campaigns. I know she'd be appalled at what you've just said, because I think her view was that actually campaigns do change things. And I think even in this one, it may be true there's this underlying current. Clearly, the left's collapsed, the right's collapsed. But the truth is the right's collapsed happened this time. it's really sort of new to have no right, that they couldn't pick themselves up, that's been so catastrophic. And it also seems to me that in a way, between Le Pen and between Mélenchon, they've really put on the table a series of questions about poverty and inequality that had fallen off, I think, partly maybe because before in 2017 the concern was growth, modernization, France trying to catch up and look like other countries, that sort of picture. And now it's really returning to this story about, well, really, France is a country that cares vastly about poverty and inequality, and that's what makes us different.
Yeah. Well, that brings us back to what we heard Léa Chamboncel say a short while ago. The French want to be well protected, and Ipsos, partners with your outfit on this, did a survey, and they said the number one issue is spending power. Number two, the healthcare system. Then came the environment, crime. Things like pension reform, which is we thought would be the big issue, but it's not number one really. And then all the way down, it was at 8th place, the war in Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think this is what we asked last time. I think with the war in Ukraine, part of the point is they can't affect it. So it's, you know, maybe something that they're concerned with when they hear it's awful, people are dying and everything, but they can't do anything about it, and their immediate politicians can't do anything about it. So I imagine that that's partly why it's not a major issue.
And this notion of wanting to be well protected.
Well, I think that was one of the defining features about France now. It's the whole story about how we're different from Britain and America, and maybe even different from Germany to some extent. And I think the sense of having lost that, in fact, is very painful.
Is that something that you find, again, you're saying that those three underlying blocks are the same as in the past, that there's continuity beneath all the disruption?
There is continuity, but she's right that there are always differences. And, you know, a campaign, like, you win on the margins. Like, there's a big trend. Either the left is going to make a really big score, have a really big score, or a terrible score. So this is the trend, and then you win on the margin. It's like, did the politician manage to get this 1 or 2 extra points that were necessary for the victory? And that's the reason why, when you look at her prediction, like, the first reaction that people had is, why are you predicting something plus or minus 4 or 5 points? And the answer is because it is that uncertain given the information that we have. When you look at polls, we have 5, 6 different pollsters in France, and even when you take the 6 different pollsters, you still get an uncertainty. You will still get a score of 12 plus or minus 4. And that's
rounds. It's amazing you can predict anything. I'm really impressed.
But Léa Chambourcel, I want to have your views on what happened on the left, because I know you don't want to say it's unusual, but what happened between the presidential election and this election is rather unusual. First of all, the left united, and number 2, they united not as usual against the moderate, the Socialist Party, but around the hard left of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. And this is never seen before in France. And at least the polls, for whatever they're worth, have shown that there is some momentum, maybe not enough to become prime minister as Jean-Luc Mélenchon hopes, but nevertheless, this is new in French politics.
It is, definitely, and it reshuffled totally the political landscape, and it's quite interesting. As I was saying before, the Parti Socialiste started collapsing in 2017, and we thought it was going to be the end with the presidential election. I just reminding that Anne Hidalgo did 1.2 or 1.3, something like that. 1.7. Sorry, well, not too far, anyways. But what's interesting? Well, still
30% error.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyways, what is interesting is that we could have expected that the Socialist Party was not going to actually get together with La France Insoumise, also because we know the history behind Jean-Luc Mélenchon and the Socialist Party. For 30 years, it's been I love you, I don't like you, I like you, I don't like you. Right? It's been a terrible relationship. It's quite interesting to analyze it and see how he became the strong man of left, and I don't know how you can call it hard left if you want, but this is also, well, I'm not surprised, because there is issue of financial issues also for the Socialist Party. If the Socialist Party was running by itself, it had not much chances to have like representative in the parliaments, to have seats. Well, we all know that the political parties get their finance according to the number of MPs. So the Socialist Party was sort of didn't have much choice. They had to run with NUPES, because obviously, but by themselves, they would have done a terrible results like they did for the presidential. So I do believe that after all, strategic money did make them get together. But I really, really hope, but I'm not talking as a citizen right now, but more as a political journalist, that we will have a cohabitation, what we call a cohabitation, and a coalition at the National Assembly, because I do doubt a lot that the things will be smooth.
Cohabitation, power sharing.
It's happened before.
It's happened before.
Yeah. but with not with a coalition at the National Assembly, and that would be very interesting because
two coalitions in effect.
Yeah, in effect, absolutely. So, as a political observer, I think it's about time that we see that.
Député Laurent, in almost every other European country, it's parliament that rules. France has a different system with a stronger executive.
That's right, Francois. Like many things in France, the French parliamentary system is actually the legacy of Charles de Gaulle. Thanks to a 1958 constitutional referendum that was successful, he ushered in the Fifth Republic. Now, under the previous system, there had been great ministerial instability. So Charles de Gaulle was very clear that under the Fifth Republic, the powers of the parliament will be limited so as not to eclipse that of the French president.
Il existe un Parlement destiné à représenter la volonté politique de la nation, à voter les lois, à contrôler l'exécutif, mais sans sortir de son rôle. Voilà, Françaises, Français.
So French parliament today is made up of two houses. You have the Senate, which is the upper house where lawmakers have 6-year terms, and they, of course, are voted in by elected officials only. And you have the National Assembly, that's the lower house in French parliament, where MPs have 5-year terms, and they, of course, are elected by the French people. What's interesting is the National Assembly has 577 seats. In order for any party, in this election at least, Emmanuel Macron's party, to get a majority, the party would need one more than half. So the magic number really is 289 seats in order to get a majority in the National Assembly. Now, France's National Assembly sits inside the Bourbon Palace on the banks of the River Seine here in the French capital of Paris. It's often referred to as l'hémicycle in French, or the semicircle, because of its semicircle seating layout. It's here in the National Assembly that MPs debate and pass laws, they conduct parliamentary inquiries, and generally hold cabinet ministers to account. It must be said that since 2008 parliamentary reforms, the French parliament, at least the lower house, has more powers than ever before. For instance, now it shares a duty of setting the daily agenda for discussion and debate with the ruling government. Before, this was something that the ruling government did by itself. Thanks to those parliamentary reforms, there's been an expansion of parliamentary commissions as well. Parliamentary commissions are really important because the wording of any bill needs to be validated by one of 8 parliamentary commissions before MPs in the National Assembly can even start to debate it. And thanks to those 2008 parliamentary reforms, there's been limitations on the use of a constitutional article called Article 49.3. Unlike European parliaments, the French parliament allows this extraordinary power to the French prime minister to invoke this article to essentially force a bill through without a vote. Now, Charles de Gaulle may have wanted the French president to have more powers than the French parliament, but it must be said that both houses do have some unique powers. For instance, in case of a disagreement between the two houses, it's the National Assembly that can override the Senate and make the final decision. However, if the French president dies or is incapacitated, well, it's the president of the Senate who becomes interim leader of France until new elections are held. François.
Député Laurent, many thanks. And just to remind you, if you're joining us here on France 24, we've a little over 31 minutes to go before polls close across the country. First round of French legislative elections. We have one number already. We're headed towards, according to our partners at Ipsos, a record abstention rate of 52.8%, eclipsing the last record, which was smashed just the last time the French voted for their parliament 5 years ago. Let's cross to Delano de Souza, who 5 years ago, Delano, La République En Marche was just getting underway, a brand new centrist coalition. Today, it's trying to establish itself with this election night.
That's true. 5 years ago, the La République En Marche, Emmanuel Macron's party, did manage to secure that majority in parliament, and that meant he was able to push through a lot of the reforms he wanted to. This time around, things could be a little tricky. We will have to see, of course, once the result comes in just under an hour's time, and of course next week how the party, the Ensemble or Together coalition perform in these legislative elections. Failure to secure that 289 seats in parliament will mean policy paralysis here in France over the course of the next 5 years, something Emmanuel Macron does want to avoid, because he does want to push through all those reforms he promised during his campaign for the presidency this time around, including reforming France's pension system. So he needs that majority in parliament. Sitting ministers have staked their jobs on the line. If they fail to secure a victory in these parliamentary polls, they will have to resign, including the country's Prime Minister, the newly named Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne.
Delano de Souza reporting live.
And Emmanuel Macron faced off against the far-right leader Marine Le Pen in the presidential election. She lost, but she is running for re-election in the northern town of Hénin-Beaumont. It's always been a tough election for the National Rally. They've never performed well. They only have 6 MPs in the outgoing National Assembly, but they're certainly aiming for more. Alison Sargent in Hénin-Beaumont.
They certainly are, Mark. People, though, here you can feel are somewhat tense. We're at, I said earlier, the community center here on the outskirts of Hénin-Beaumont. The courtyard around me is starting to fill up. There are some snacks laid out on paper plates. It's a very casual community vibe, and people actually only just now started kind of going towards them. But before that, they were really just standing around, chatting kind of quietly. You could feel a lot of tension. People seem pretty subdued. As you said, they know that these parliamentary elections don't tend to go in their party's favor. That's because of the majority takes all system. Many of them say turnout is also very important for the national rally, and low turnout is a bad sign for them. Although here in Pas-de-Calais, the stronghold of Marine Le Pen, turnout does tend to be higher than the national average. I talked to a couple of her supporters who said that they were supposed to be manning a local flea market today, but they took time off to go out and vote because it was important to them. They said these days people are really just surviving. They're no longer living. They talked about the price of gas, security, immigration. Those are the issues that are important to them. They said Marine Le Pen is the only one who defends France, and they also pointed out that she does it alone, that her party is running without a coalition, sort of a dig, I think, at the left-wing coalition of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Marine Le Pen, unlike the left, has been less ambitious, more realistic about her prospects in this election. She's not pretending that she's going to get a majority, but she is hoping to finally cross that 15-seat threshold to have a group in parliament, and she's really hoping to have much higher than that.
Alison Sargent reporting from the northern town of Hénin-Beaumont. Annabelle, I want to ask you, I mean, obviously the National Rally has said for years that the system is unfair. We score 35% of the presidential election, and we only have a handful of MPs.
Well, I think it is unfair. And we have the same problem in England with third and fourth parties. And it's a problem by the time you've got a third or over a third of the electorate who simply aren't being represented, whatever they do. I mean, whether or not you like the party, it just doesn't seem right.
Do you agree, Rémi, that it's a problem? I mean, the National Rally, if I counted correctly, they have 6 MPs. This is 1% of the National.
I mean, I speak for myself. This is my personal opinion, but yes, I do think it's a shame. It's, you know, this is not how representative democracies are supposed to work. I mean, not at least how they teach us how they work.
In 2017, the then candidate Emmanuel Macron promised a reform, that there would be at least a dose of proportional representation.
Didn't he say that again this time?
He did.
Okay.
Because it didn't happen.
Because it didn't happen. That's why I asked the question.
Do you agree that it's a problem for French democracy? Or, as General de Gaulle thought about this, to avoid the instability of the Fourth Republic, it's good because it gives you stability and allows you to govern efficiently?
It's an interesting question. I do believe it's a problem in terms of democracy and the necessity of having everyone represented, or feeling represented at least. The big problem is also that people don't vote you don't have the same voters for the presidential election and the legislative election. Obviously, if we didn't have such as much abstention, perhaps people will be a bit more represented or feel more represented. I think also the communication around the election isn't very great. The government hasn't done much. Also, Emmanuel Macron took a long time to appoint his government. It took a long time to appoint his prime minister. And the campaign didn't happen. Like, the campaign didn't happen during the presidential elections because this is how he had the opportunity of securizing his communication. So I think that we needed more debate. Perhaps we would have been interesting to have, rather than just changing the institution, because this is a solution. Obviously, we can definitely change constitution. Why not? But also we can think about the tools we have now and how we can, make it better. If the communication around the election, the importance of the election, because this is also what people don't understand, like reminding that the National Assembly can actually control the government. It's often something that we forget about. Reminding that the agenda of the National Assembly is also organized with the government, and the government has a lot of power on what bills are actually examined or voted in the National Assembly is very important. I think there is a big gap and a lot of work to do on how politics work in our country. Since the youngest people need to understand what's the importance of voting. We hear people saying, what's the point? I mean, I don't even know who to vote for. I don't even know who's the name of my potential MPs. This is terrible. I think it's a big problem, and it's not just the government of Emmanuel Macron, it's also the previous government that haven't done much about it, that haven't tried to make it understandable. I mean, I have a master's degree in public international law and in public law. I've been studying constitutional law, and I worked in politics for years. I do understand how it works now, but it took me a while. I mean, it's terrible that common citizens do not have the understanding on how to pass and vote a bill that is actually going to be ruling their everyday life. It's a big problem. You have a lot of MPs, when they get at the National Assembly, they don't have an idea how it works. And this is a big problem. We need to be working on that. And someone has to take the responsibility on this. And it has to be the government. It has to be the state that has to say, okay, this is how it works. When Jean-Luc Mélenchon said, elect me prime minister, at first I was very shocked because I was like, you don't elect a prime minister. But the sentence itself makes understand that the prime minister is actually representing the nation and is actually out of the majority of the assembly. So we need to be working a lot on this.
Well, you just mentioned Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He's also advocating for a sixth republic. And we can now cross to Marseille. Cole Stangler is following the campaign of the top lieutenant of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Manuel Bompard, who's certainly hoping to win, but he's certainly hoping that his party will have much more than 17 MPs as in the current National Assembly. Cole?
Yeah, that's right. And to hit on a theme we've been hearing a lot about, everyone talks about it, but it's especially key here for the left coalition, which is the question of turnout, participation. We've seen it already hit a record low, of course, in 2017. The numbers here are not very encouraging at the moment. If you look at the figures in Marseille here, as I was saying, bastion of the left in many respects, lower than the national average. So that's not great news for the left. And the left is particularly interested in these turnout figures because the groups of the population that they do well among, including here in Marseille, you have a lot of young people that tend to vote for the left, and you have a lot of lower income working class people, especially in the center and towards the north of the city, that tend to vote for the left. The question is, are they going to come out and vote? And as we were hearing, this sort of attempt to have Mélenchon sort of personalize this campaign is an attempt to do just that, to boost turnout. I was talking with someone who was doing some door-to-door with one of the candidates in Marseille, in the north part of the city, as I was talking about. And, people didn't necessarily know the legislative elections were happening, but when they heard Mélenchon's name, they said, oh, okay, maybe it's worth coming out and vote. So this attempt to sort of personalize the election is an attempt to try to tackle this difficult problem of turnout. And again, the numbers not so encouraging at the moment here in Marseille, but we'll have to see pretty shortly, what the overall trends are.
Paul Stangler reporting from Marseille will reach out later on once the results are in.
In the last municipal elections, it was a coalition of the left that broke the right's lock on power in the city of Marseille. Further along the Riviera, different story. Let's cross to Alexander Alcott, who's following the campaign to get elected to parliament of far-right pundit and presidential candidate Éric Zemmour. Alexander, there's two kinds of far-right votes, you might say. We had Alison Sargent reporting from what is France's equivalent of a Rust Belt in the north of the country. It's a different crowd where you are.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And Éric Zemmour, his voters tend to be slightly different because Marine Le Pen, she's more appealing to the poorer, more working class voter who feel left behind, whereas Zemmour's electors are more affluent, often, and in this part just near Saint-Tropez, it's a more affluent area where people are voting for him. Now, it's been quite an astonishing fall from grace in a way for Éric Zemmour, who leading into the presidential election was seen by some as a real contender for making it into that second round of the presidential election. And in the end, he finished fourth with just 7%, as I mentioned earlier. Now, the right-wing provocateur, unlike the left, he's been unable to link up at all with the traditional right-wing party, now named the National Rally. And he's trying to get his new movement. He's actually being very ambitious by trying to field 550 candidates in the constituencies across the nation, but he's not guaranteed that any of them will actually make it through.
Alexander Alcott reporting live from Saint-Tropez on the French Riviera. Rémi Louf, I'm haunted by what you said earlier about underneath all the disruption and change is continuity in French politics. Is it the case when you see the breakdown of the squabbles between the far right, when you see the centrists picking off votes from the traditional conservatives?
I mean, this is exactly what I said to Alex, who's working with me on this, and he's a political scientist. And he told me, I know this sounds completely crazy, but many people, scientists, not all of them, will tell you that it's the case as well, that there are some big trends and then there's some sort of recomposition around this trend. Like, you have some people who are more left-wing, you have people who are right-wing, you have people who don't really know and are in the middle, and then you have people at the extremes. And these are like the trends that that we keep saying, different parties come out of these different trends, and they get bigger and smaller. But you can actually use that to say something about the current elections and the current trends. And if we didn't have that, if this wasn't true in France, we would not be able to model the election, because the political landscape changes constantly, so we wouldn't be able to use data from previous elections to predict the current one.
Or let me play devil's advocate here. Or is it the victory of social democracy over decades that what if France is effectively the equivalent of a German grand coalition in Emmanuel Macron, and the rest is just trying to vie for an alternate identity?
I can't answer that question.
Annabelle Lever, your thoughts on that?
Well, I wanted to pick up on what you said, because if it's true that you've got this underlying trend and, the rest is just surface, how do you explain the fact, maybe it just is, that very affluent people all over France are willing to vote for someone as racist, as undisguisedly racist as Zemmour? And given that that's all he has in his programme, it seems to me extraordinary. I don't know. I would have thought that not so long ago, Fillon, before that, it would have been considered completely unacceptable to vote like this. So how would you explain that? What's going on?
That there is still that trend, which is the far right, but it's growing, and populations can move from, like, the demographics can change and can move from one of these trends to the other. That's totally possible. And we need some expert knowledge to actually, assign Zemmour to, like, one political trend. And one difficulty we had for the presidential election was how to classify Zemmour, because it was something that even Alex, who There's a political scientist that's in elections before, didn't really know how to classify him. And so that was, these are the general lines, but there are always exceptions,
Right. I mean, what's interesting, Léa Chamboncel, is the importance of inflation in this campaign. Because, yes, you had the war in Ukraine, you had COVID. It seems that now all this is forgotten. And Marine Le Pen has been harping on the issue, obviously Jean-Luc Mélenchon as well. And so everyone is focused on the cost of living. Inflation has overtaken all the other issues.
Yeah, it's true. But also, that's exactly what we were talking about. I mean, people are struggling. It's a reality. Lots of people actually went into extreme poverty after the beginning of the crisis, the COVID crisis.
But the figures are great. If you
the figures are great, but not for everyone.
And everything, yeah.
Not for everyone, unfortunately. And there is lots of people that are still really struggling. And unfortunately, these people aren't voting. Most of the people that are struggling are not voting because what do you look like? The sociology, of the voters for the legislative election is mainly like wealthy people that are over 60 years old. For lots of people that are voting are over 60. So young people, people in very poor situation, and are basically left behind, and they're not taking the opportunity of voting. They don't figure it as an opportunity of voting. We're going to see if what Mélenchon was promoting and also his speech actually worked. We're going to see tonight how many people will be actually voted for the NUPES. But what I really believe is that the reality of everyday life of French people is way worse than we can imagine, and way worse than the numbers tells us.
We thought with this election that if you'd predicted a year ago that we'd be talking about COVID. We then had you could say, knock-on effect of that, plus the war in Ukraine with inflation. Now, the numbers are not as bad as with some neighbors like Germany or even countries like the United States. Still, we're at 4 decades high in most of Europe, and France is no exception. When you see the consumer price index, there you see the inflation rate. But of course, what Léa Chamboncel said is true. The numbers may be better than elsewhere, but people are still suffering, whether or not, and it's cold comfort to know that it's worse in Germany, for instance. Annabelle Lever, again, we're trying to nail down if there's a French specificity to these elections, or has the world become a smaller place, and these issues are just the issues that everyone else in Europe is facing?
I don't know. I mean, my feeling is that there's a rural-urban divide in France that seems to me different. I don't really see that in England. And that seems to be behind some of this sort of deep alienation from politics. Because even in England, we don't have a voting rate as low as this. So partly, I think it's a system that you've got, the legislative doesn't really elect a prime minister in the way that you do in England.
Yes.
But I also think that the urban-rural divide seems to have left a lot of people feeling voiceless. And so maybe urban youngsters and urban poor feel that maybe they can identify with Mélenchon. But it's not clear that he's really picking up yet so much outside these. I know it's improving, but I think there's still a long way to go. Whereas my feeling is that at least in England and probably in Germany and other countries, it's not quite so sharp, that divide.
It's not quite so sharp. Rémi Louf, what does your data tell you on this?
Well, actually, there were some really good maps that came out of the presidential elections, and where you look where Mélenchon or Macron or Le Pen arrived first on the first round, and there's that very clear urban-rural divide that she describes, like Le Pen being really high in the very rural areas, Mélenchon doing really well in urban areas, and Macron doing well pretty much, sort of uniformly everywhere. And so, it is obvious when you look at maps. And people even made fun of these maps, because when you look at the results of Mélenchon, the map with Mélenchon, you barely see this red on the map, because it's just concentrated in these urban areas where the density is huge. So you can't really see them on the map.
And the knock-on effect of those people in those areas that are far from the big city feeling alienated, could we have another yellow vests movement where instead of voting, they go out in the streets?
I also see that, that people protest less and less. I think if you compare the number of protests during this 5 years to the number, if you exclude the Gilets jaunes, which were a huge amount of protests, but people have been protesting less and less.
That.
Yeah.
The cost of
people have been
petrol is really
protesting
gonna
less and
affect that
less,
one.
I think. And people also are, less and less part of unions. And so I think there's a general trend here of people just being less interested in...
Well, I don't quite agree, sorry, but because what you're mentioning the Yellow Vest, but one of the main political claim from the Yellow Vest was to be participating and asking to get more and more engaged in politics, but not just throughout elections, but through the RIC, which is citizen initiative referendum. That was like the main political claim. So I think maybe it's just the political fiction of voting is just maybe over, and we need to think about a way of engaging citizens differently and making the political decision making different. This is what Macron promised with what was it called, the National Convention of Reconstruction or whatever it is called. But he said that actually he understood that. I don't know how effective this is going to be, but
it was one of his campaign promises.
It's one of his campaign promises, the main actually. So I think we can't say that people don't want to get invested in politics. They do want to engage, but the question is how also.
I think the question is how. What's certain is that politics is changing. France 24's James Andre is covering the mood in the capital. James, tell us where you are now.
Well, I'm currently in front of the headquarters of Les Républicains, that is the centre-right party here in France. This wasn't told, this election today, and we'll have to see what the outcome is. But this was the main opposition force in the French Parliament, and indeed they are hoping to get between 50 and 70 seats today, depending on how
James,
well
we're going to
they
cross back
do.
to you in a few moments. Sound issues, which we hope to have fixed. Apologies for that. Mark Perlman.
Yes, let's head south and on the other side of the political scene to Marseille and to the new Popular Alliance. And Cole Stangler is standing by just a few minutes to go before 8 p.m. when the polls will close in Marseille and all the large towns in France.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. We should have Emmanuel Bompard, the candidate running here in this district, speaking later tonight. We saw him enter the headquarters here. You have a lot of activists that are waiting for those first results to come in. That should be coming, as you said, very, very shortly. And they'll be looking at really a city that's a very diverse, complex city that in many ways tells a story also of France. If you look at the different makeup of these legislative districts, you have sort of more middle-class districts in the center that are sort of left-leaning. You have very more lower income districts in the north that'll vote probably expected to vote for the left. You have a mix also of districts that are in part of the left, but also people from voters that vote for the far right expected to vote for the far right. So you have this really sort of kaleidoscope of the national picture here in the city of Marseille. Again, though, I should say that this district that we're in right now, in the second arrondissement in Marseille, where I'm in the headquarters in, Emmanuel Bompard, the successor, expected to win this.
Stangler in Marseille.
And we can cross to Delano de Souza, who's also standing by. There's a little under 7 minutes to go before the top of the hour and the finals polls close in Paris.
That's right, François. Any minute now, we'll sort of get a sense of how the Ensemble or Together coalition is set to fare for these parliamentary elections. Of course, Emmanuel Macron does need that majority in parliament if he's going to push through reforms he has promised. Otherwise, we're simply going to have 5 years of policy paralysis here in France if he's not able to get that majority in parliament. Sitting ministers in the country have essentially, they need to win either or will get us by the next round to keep their jobs. Otherwise, they will be forced to resign. It'll be interesting to see how the country's Prime Minister, Elizabeth Borne, fares, considering she has never run for public office here in France. It'll also, we should be looking out to see how Damien Abad fares, the Minister of Solidarity, whose appointment created quite an outcry as he is accused of rape. Plus, we also have the country's Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, who has been recently in the spotlight given the heavy-handed police tactics we have seen here in France, especially just last month during the Champions League final. So any minute now we'll sort of get a sense for how things are going to go for the new centre-right coalition. And we're going to have the Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne speaking here between 8 to 9 p.m. Paris time, local time. So we'll be bringing that speech live on France 24.
We will indeed. Delano de Souza, we're inside 5 minutes to go before the polls close across France in the first round of legislative elections. Let's see if we can cross back over to James Andre, who is outside the headquarters of the Les Républicains party. James, less than 5 minutes to go. When you were in that polling station earlier, you said you saw a late rush. How much of a rush, though?
Well, I'd say a moderate rush, Francois. Basically, we didn't see like massive queues forming, but we did see, a bunch of people, a steady flow of people, last-minute voters, whereas the rest of the day had been incredibly calm, it has to be said. So we'll have to see if that does have a bit of an effect. It seems that some late voters did decide at the last minute to cast their ballots, but will that be enough to sway those participation numbers? That is, of course, very unclear. The president of that polling station telling me that she believed that they'd finish off around 50%, where they were between 70 and 72% for the presidential election. And a man who votes in that specific polling station telling me he'd seen lines when it was the presidential election and not for this parliamentary election.
James Andre reporting live outside the headquarters of Les Républicains party in the 15th arrondissement of Paris. We can perhaps just ask the question with the clock winding down to the top of the hour. Again, this low turnout, does it matter all that much in the end?
Well, I think by the time you've got more people not voting than voting, it matters. So I'm very opposed to compulsory voting. And, I've spent a lot of time arguing that, well, within reason, abstention doesn't matter. But I think by the time you're talking about more not voting than voting, something's gone really wrong.
Léa Chambousel, very quickly, what will you be watching at 8 p.m.?
The results, obviously.
The abstention?
The abstention, yeah, well, the abstention, we sort of have it already. So what I'm looking at, I'm going to look at, the results for the ministers, because I think this is quite interesting. It can reshuffle definitely, the government, if Emmanuel Macron has his majority, which is not certain. And I'm quite excited about the results of NUPES, and I want to see how things are going to go.
We can sense that, Rémi.
I'm going to look at the differential between what LRM did in the first round of the presidential election and what's happening now, just to see if there's some dynamics or not. Because I know that the popularity of Emmanuel Macron actually slightly decreased over the past few months, like after re-election, which is the first. Like our model says that it's slightly decreased, which is, unheard of before. So
interesting.
I just want to see if the trend continues.
Mark Prummond, is that a factor of the fact that you have this unprecedented case of a sitting president with a majority getting reelected? In the past, there have been reelected presidents, but they were always in opposition at the time of their reelection.
Yes, Emmanuel Macron made history by becoming the first president to be reelected with a sitting majority. But then something needs to happen. He needs to get a majority in parliament, because you would then face another unprecedented moment where you have a president re-elected but without a parliament, and that's the whole problem for him. He has to reach this magic number, 289 seats to get a majority. No one knows if this is happening. All the polls have been quite cautious. They said, we don't know, we don't really know, because there's a lot of abstention, obviously.
All right, we're inside the last minute of voting in the first round of France's legislative elections, as you can see from the clock behind us here in the studio. Mark, what's coming up when the clock strikes 8 in the French capital?
Also, we'll have the first estimates of our partners at Ipsos. We'll only get a handful of outright winners. Before next Sunday's runoff, we'll see who's got the momentum heading into the second round. As Emmanuel Macron's centrist coalition seeks to keep its majority, a revamped left aims at a comeback, and the far right hopes to finally break through.
All right, first reactions from the main players. Complete coverage from our correspondents in Paris and across the country. You're watching Election Night on France 24. Thanks. It's 8 p.m. in Paris. Emmanuel Macron on course, perhaps, to retain that overall majority. They're counting ballots across France after the first round of legislative elections. These are the first projections, Mark Perlman, from our partners Ipsos.
And they're very interesting. Obviously, those are just estimates, but the magic number is 289. This is what you need to get an absolute majority in the parliament. And what we're seeing is that the estimate for Emmanuel Macron's Together coalition is between 255 and 295 seats. So, according to the polls, it's not certain at all that he would get this outright absolute majority he's seeking and that he's begged the electors to give him. What's interesting is the new Popular Union, this new coalition on the left around Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party. They're should be getting between 150 to 190 seats, which would make them the main opposition force in parliament. Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party only has 17 MPs right now. So we're talking about multiplying this by 10. On the far right, the National Rally is expected to get between 20 and 45 members of parliament. They only have 6 right now, and this would allow them to also reach another magic number, 15. This is the threshold to be able to form a parliamentary group. The mainstream party, Les Républicains, they have around 100 MPs. They should get between 50 and 80. They were expecting maybe worse. So it's going to be very, very interesting. But according to those estimates, everything is up for grabs until next Sunday.
It's not one race, but 577 separate ones. As you were saying, Mark, the magic number to have an outright majority is 289. Emmanuel Macron's party fairly close to it, but they're too close for comfort, you might say.
Absolutely.
Is this an accurate snapshot of French politics today?
Well, if you do a poll and you ask people who they vote for, actually, this does not translate into the projection of seats. I believe we'll be able to see very soon how people voted. Here you go. Exactly neck and neck. Emmanuel Macron's Together alliance, 25.2% of the votes. The new Popular Union, 25.2% of the votes. Obviously, when you look at the projection of seats, it's not the same story. Emmanuel Macron is well ahead. The National Rally, they get nearly 19% of the votes according to the estimates, but they only get 30 to 50 MPs in a parliament that has 577 seats. As for the Républicains, they get 13.7%. So obviously the system of this election doesn't give you a real trend in terms of how people vote, but it's going to be very, very interesting and much closer than most pollsters thought.
All right, a big surprise there. And again, a reminder that it is a 2-round system. The runoff's taking place next weekend. They're running for the same seat, representing the French abroad in Britain, Ireland, Northern Europe, and the Baltic states. We're pleased to welcome incumbent Member of Parliament Alexandre Holroyd. And we have your result because of the fact that the first round took place for the French abroad a week ago. 38%. Welcome to the welcome to
Thank you for having me.
24. In next week's runoff, you'll be facing off against Green candidate Charlotte Mainvielle. You're endorsed by the left-wing New Popular Union coalition. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It's the first round for 11 seats of the French abroad, again, that were held last Sunday. Second round will be the same as everyone else. In that same constituency, Margot Derieux eliminated. Yes. My condolences. In the first round, you represented Éric Zemmour's far-right Reconquête, or Reconquest party. Thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
Before we go to our guests, let's go to Delano de Souza, who's standing by at the headquarters of Emmanuel Macron's Ensemble party, where the Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, is waiting to see how she fared in Normandy.
That's right, Elisabeth Borne, who has never run for elected office here in France. Now, as those results came in, 25.2%, both the left-wing coalition as well as the centre-right coalition of Ensemble or together, clearly neck and neck. So things clearly up in the air. We will have to wait and see how the evening progresses to see how those sitting ministers are performing in their constituencies, because they have essentially staked their jobs on the line. They have to win these parliamentary polls either tonight or outright tonight or by in the second round next week to remain in their jobs. So we will see how the night progresses.
Many thanks to Delano de Souza, and we'll be crossing back again live when the Prime Minister speaks.
Let's now head south to the port city of Marseille. Cole Stangler has been following the campaign of the top lieutenant of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Emmanuel Bompard, who's certainly hoping to get a good result, but also hoping that this new coalition will be able to become the main opposition force and maybe more.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. You know, we just heard audible applause just in the room next to me when we had those projections that first go up. So people here clearly pretty enthused about these projections, which again are just projections. And they're really less concerned about the seat projections, which, as we've been hearing again and again, it's a two-round vote. Second, these are just projections. But if you look at the actual percent numbers, you have NUPES, the new Popular Union Coalition, and Macron's coalition running neck and neck. That's seen as a very good result for the left so far, and we'll see how this plays out later in the evening. Just to give you a sense here of Bompard, who's expected to speak later, he's saying now, again, this is from Twitter, that they'll be in the second round in more than 500 districts across the country, and that they're the first political force in the country, again, according to this is Bompard's point of view. But a very good result, a very good projection, I should say, for the NUPES coalition that wanted to be in as many of these second round matchups as possible. And it looks like the percent that they have right now is going to get them into a fair amount of these. And again, we'll have to see how things progress throughout the evening.
Cole Stangler will check with you once the results are in Marseille. Obviously, for Manuel Bompard, it's an important race. I want to ask you about your first reaction, both to the voting scores, but also to the projection of the National Assembly. It seems an absolute majority is not guaranteed at all.
I don't think an absolute majority is guaranteed in any election. I think one should go into an election humble.
But that was the goal.
Of course it's the goal. The goal of an election is always to obtain a majority or to win that election. But the truth is that what I see from this polls is, first, the turnout was relatively low, and there's a real subject of democratic deficit that we've got to continue working on in the coming years, because it's been going down election after election, even before the system changed in terms of parliamentary and presidential election, actually since the 80s. And then secondly, I think what's very important to keep in mind is this is a two-round election. What I see from this poll is that the vast majority of constituencies will see a candidate from my party or my union, Ensemble, in the second round. And I think there's everything to play for in that second election. We'll be humbled. We're going to go and try and fight for every single of those votes in the coming week. And obviously the French will decide next week on Sunday.
Charlotte Benfield, does this exceed your expectations?
Yes, I think this is a really great result for us. I think it really shows that there's a big disapproval for Emmanuel Macron. It's actually the first time that there's been such a low percentage for a current president. I think under 30%. It's the first time ever. Jacques Chirac, François Hollande have all had at least like 40%. So this is putting 25% for both Emmanuel Macron's party and our alliance. I think there's been huge enthusiasm over the fact that the left has been united. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to actually have the chance to have a majority. And I think there's a big risk here for Emmanuel Macron not to have a majority in parliament.
Is what unites you a common platform, or is what unites you being anti-Macron? You yourself are not from Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party.
Well, I think, of course, there's of course a strategic element in this alliance. Of course, it makes sense for us to be able to win and to be able to have a real majority. And I think it's also what the electorate was waiting for. We've seen that in the presidential elections. They were waiting for us to unite, which we managed to do. And I also think that we have common ground in terms of environmental and social justice values. So I think we have both the combination, of course, coming together to be able to have a majority in parliament, but also common ground on things that matter and things where actually the current president has showed a lot of inaction.
A lot of inaction, you say. Margot Darieux, your reaction to this result?
Well, I think it is quite concerning to see that the parliament will be mostly divided between the majority of the president and the extreme left. And of course, I can only be disappointed.
Are you saying Charlotte Maviel is extreme left?
Well, yes, the coalition is led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, communists and others. So, yeah, I think that, it's quite obvious that their leader is extreme left. So it is concerning. I believe that they happen to be the main opposition. And I can only regret that the right hasn't been able to unite, because we could have had a relative majority. But because of the refusal of the Rassemblement National and the Républicains to unite, we find ourselves in this position where the left...
Poaching Marine Le Pen's niece, did that make it impossible to have a coalition of the far right?
I don't think that's the topic. I think the right-wing voters in France, right-wing voters in France wanted this unity. And I think if you only have the best interest of the nation at heart, then they would have united. So you can only regret that family business or details or excuses came in the way of this union.
Speaking of family business, we can now cross to Hénin-Beaumont, where Marine Le Pen, the leader of the national rally, or at least its presidential candidate, is running for election. In 2017, she scored 46% in the first round. She is maybe hoping to do even better that time around, Alison.
Well, Mark, here's the thing. Marine Le Pen seems to, we're hearing, have been possibly a victim of the low turnout, because we believe that she has done better than that. We believe she's actually gotten above 50%, which means that she should be going on to the second round, except we've been hearing that voter turnout might be below 50%, which would which would send her through to the next round, when she should be winning outright for having gotten over 50%. But if turnout is below 50%, then she will have to, by default, go on to a second round. So that would be too bad for Marine Le Pen, otherwise getting a very good score. The score nationally also right in line with the polls, very solid score for them, that 19%, up from 13% back in 2017. Now, back then, they only ended up with 8 seats. This time, though, they are projected, as we saw, to get 20 to 40, putting them over that 15-seat threshold to form a group in the National Assembly. That would be the first time that her party has had a group since 1986, when her father was in charge. That was back when legislative elections were on a proportional system, which made it easier for them to get seats. So this would be historic for them to be able to get to that threshold with the winner-takes-all system. So unfortunate, possibly, we haven't gotten that confirmed yet. So Marine Le Pen got over that 50% threshold, should be an outright winner tonight, but due to the turnout, she might have to go to a second round by default. Disappointing for her, but overall, solid results overall. The atmosphere here has turned into more of a backyard barbecue. People feeling pretty positive. They've all migrated over to the podium where Marine Le Pen is set to give a speech. She hasn't arrived yet, but we are expecting her to come in the next half hour or so.
Alison Sargent, I do believe actually that the rule is that you need to have more than 25% of registered voters going to the ballot box in order to be able to win. But we'll obviously wait for confirmation of this result for Marine Le Pen.
Well, let's check, sticking with the far right, with the constituency where Margot Darieux's party leader is running. Alexander Alcott is in Saint-Tropez. Any news there?
We're still waiting for the official result to come through. I'm standing in front of the town hall where we've been talking to the mayor and trying to work out what the result is. We do have the national result, as you've been talking about, and as we can see that the Reconquest Party of this candidate here, it's has only got 4%, down from 7% of what he got in the presidential vote. Interestingly, also, Le Pen is down from her presidential toll. So across the board, nationwide, there's been a drop from for the far right here in France. Now, it could be the end of this political movement that grew very quickly in the build-up to the presidential election for Eric Zemmour. He was, as I mentioned earlier on, he was up to about 18% in the polling and considered a real possibility to make it through to the second round in the presidential vote. And this support seems to have withered away. Now, where has it gone wrong? Now, he was focusing on issues like immigration, Islam, these kind of things that he likes to speak about and get a lot of talk time, creating a lot of controversy in the media. Whereas Marine Le Pen seems to have worked out that that's not what the voters on the right were caring about. They were more caring about the cost of living and being left behind and these kind of issues. And he didn't quite strike a chord in the way that Marine Le Pen managed to. Also, a lot of people that did support Eric Zemmour early on were disgusted, as they put it, with some of the things that he was saying. Just on Thursday, he managed to not be convicted for another hate speech conviction. He's been convicted 3 times of hate speech over the years. And the latest one was for calling minors who are immigrants coming to France rapists, thieves and assassins. This kind of thing that he comes out with, amongst other things. And a lot of people were really turned off by a lot of the countless controversies that he was coming out with. And we don't have official results here just yet, as far as I've seen, but I think there are a lot of long faces as I look around.
Checking back in with you, Alexander Alcott reporting from Saint-Tropez. You're watching Election Night on France 24, first round of legislative elections. Diptyque Laurent is at the big board. Again, right now, Diptyque, these are estimates.
That's right. These are just projections, Francois, but this is what Emmanuel Macron's party is projected to win, 55 to 295 seats. You have the new Popular Union, that's a left coalition. Well, they're on track to get about 150 to 190 seats, while Marine Le Pen's far-right party, well, they looking like they're going to pick up 20 to 45 seats, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's more than the 15 needed to form a parliamentary group, so that is definitely good news for her, at least. Anyway, the big number is, of course, 289. That's a majority. That's the number needed to get a majority in the National Assembly, Francois.
Diptyque Laurent. Well, for more, again, Mark Perlman, I just want to go over a point to stress it with our viewers, which is the number of seats right now. These are projections that, again, we're going to have a whole new campaign that starts in the morning, going to next Sunday's runoff.
Yes, absolutely. The equation is very difficult, including for the pollsters. First of all, because of the abstention rate. Let's not forget that we just made history. Sadly, one could say for the state of French democracy, we have nearly 53% of abstention, and that's a record, but it changes a lot, the dynamics of the second round, because it means a lot of candidates are going to be eliminated, and how they or their voters actually cast their ballot in the second round makes it very difficult to predict what will happen. And this is why the estimate ranges from 255 seats to 295 seats, so 40 seat range for Emmanuel Macron's coalition. Same thing for the leftist coalition, between 150 and 190, and this changes the equation once again, because the pivot or the magic number at the National Assembly is 289. This is where you reach an absolute majority. This is what Emmanuel Macron wants. The other possibility is a relative majority. This hasn't happened since the late 1980s. Or you could have cohabitation if the opposition wins more seats. But according even to those very broad estimates, this seems very unlikely to happen.
So your constituency, the French abroad, it's a new concept since 2007, having the French abroad represented in Parliament. This particular constituency, would you consider Alexandre Holroyd as atypical? Because when we hear voter concerns, and we were talking about it a moment ago, across France, top one is cost of living for everybody. Is for your constituency, which represents places like Britain, the post-Brexit blues, or you're also representing the Baltics? Is it the war in Ukraine?
I think the beauty of the National Assembly is that each seat is absolutely unique and has a set of issues which are proper to that seat. And I think what's very important to remember with those numbers is this is 577 elections, and we're just entering the second round of those elections. What's important in those numbers is that in the vast majority of constituencies in the following week, in the coming week, there will be two very different projects which will be proposed to electors. Very different projects. And we will carry the values that we've carried for the past 5 years, which are pro-European, which are Republican, which are pro-economy, and which are pro-green transition. Those values will be carried. Electors will choose in every single of those seats an MP, and they can vary for different reasons. There could be an MP who is very, very locally represented. I'm going to interrupt you very quickly, Alexandre. I think it's very important to keep that in mind.
I'm going to interrupt you. We'll get back to this conversation in a moment. Let's cross to Marine Le Pen, the leader of the National Rally, who's addressing reporters.
Bien, mesdames, messieurs, chers amis.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, I would just like to say how thankful I am for all of those people who voted for our party in the first round of these elections. My thanks go out to those people for the 11th circumscription of the Pas-de-Calais who gave me 55% of votes. Given the level of participation, I would like to see more people out next week to just reiterate the importance of our score. So what we can see is that in a number of circumscriptions around France, even in the third circumscription of the Guadeloupe, where we won out over the incumbent MP. So we can see fantastic results. 7 points up on 2017 was a score that we won despite considerable drop in voter turnout. And this is because there are structural issues at play. Our electoral system is anti-democratic, it is sclerotic, it needs great change. We need a democracy so everyone can be heard, so everyone can be represented. That would be one of the priorities of these 5 coming years. So in circumscriptions where a National Rally candidate is still in the running, I want to see more people coming out for the second round, because this second round is an opportunity for us to take on a strong sense of unity with great patriots in Parliament. It is your opportunity to have people defend your values, your ideals, and your desires, and to defend you, to defend your purchasing power, to defend everything that you need. And when we can see what is happening in this country, we can see what happened in the Stade de France, when we see the rising fuel prices, we need change. We need people in power. We need to be able to defend employers, employees, men, women, children, families, because everyone is suffering in our country. So next Sunday, it is important to not let Emmanuel Macron take over the absolute majority, because if he has that absolute majority, he will abuse it. He will use it to see his own anti-socialist policies coming into play. He will do it against you, not for you. Because if we let him take on absolute majority, we'd be heading into a tunnel with no light at the end. And he will send us into a situation where most people in France will not be able to breathe. So you need to have people, members of parliament who represent you, who represent your values, and who will do so bravely, because they will do so to put our country and its people back on its own 2 feet. So in those circumscriptions where there will be a runoff between République En Marche and NUPES, I call on all of our electors to choose between neither of them, to not choose between one party who would deprive you of your rights and one party who would deprive you of your own goods and belongings. France is not a stock market, nor is it an industrial estate.
J'invite les électeurs à agir en conscience, en fonction du sens patriotique de ce candidat.
I want electors, those are voters for the Rassemblement National, to act conscientiously, knowing that this fight is not over yet, that you still have a fundamental role to play in the future, because you will be able to get a strong nationalistic party. So it would be a grand victory for the national team, for the people who are there, for the nation, for the people of France. It is within our reach, it is within our grasp, and I count on you. Long live France, long live the French Republic.
Far-right leader.
Merci à vous tous.
Thank you all.
Far-right leader Marine Le Pen claiming that she has won with 55% of the vote in the first round, but because of the low turnout, rules are you have to go to a second round. She called on her supporters across the country to vote for neither of the other two big blocs in next Sunday's runoff.
Yes, and we can now immediately cross to Hénin-Beaumont, where Alison Sargent was listening to Marine Le Pen's speech and the reactions to her good results. It's not good enough, but at least she sounded happy.
Exactly. Not quite good enough, but it feels like a technicality that it wasn't quite good enough. There's still a lot of enthusiasm here. A big cheer when she came in, walked in through the courtyard of this community center. We heard those chants of Marine, Marine after her speech. You heard it from her. She got 55% of the votes. She also celebrated the fact that the party will be going on. She didn't give us a number, but she said going on to the second round in numerous other constituencies, including one in Guadeloupe that she pointed out. She said that the goal of the party is to revive democracy so that everyone feels heard, a call on people really to go out and vote, really trying to call for a big mobilization ahead of that second round that's going to be crucial for her.
Alison Sargent in Hénin-Beaumont, and the leftist leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon is about to speak. We can now cross to Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Let's take a listen.
Right. It's up to us now. Sorry, I've just got to get my papers together here. Ladies and gentlemen, all of those who have been waiting so patiently, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I would like to thank you for the fantastic results that we have seen. Coming out of this first round of elections, the new Popular Union is leading the charge. It will be leading the charge in some 500 circumscriptions in the second round. And when we look at the forecasts, currently only contain some sense of illusion. They are not a true reflection of the current state of politics in this country. The truth that we want to see, the truth that we want to see coming out of this first round, is that the current presidential party is being beaten for the first time since the Fifth Republic has come into power. A president-elect has not been able to carry over a majority following the legislative elections. So I call on the people of France, in light of these results, and given the opportunity, the fantastic opportunity that we now have for our lives, for our individual lives, and also for the shared destiny that we have, I call on all people of France to come out in hordes next Sunday, to to definitively reject and turn down the dark projects that the majority has in plan, that Macron has in store. The retirement at 65, the compulsed work to be on the RSA assistance systems, and all other forms of program, his platform that never able to be debated, the 80 billion euros that he wants to take out of the state coffers, to be able to simply take us back to a 3% deficit that he promised before the Commission. 80 billion euros. That means taking out of the state coffers the equivalent of all of the budget for the Interior Ministry and the Education Ministry combined. And as we know, and as common sense shows us, it is nonsensical to take out such money from the state coffers. So therefore, it is up to us to reject that, but also the idea that goes with it, the idea that increasing the VAT would just finance it. So yes, we have to reject, we have to put to the side certain factors, but what is even more important than all of that is that in having everyone mobilizing next Sunday, it is a vote for the younger generations. So in all of the hard-hit neighborhoods, the poor neighborhoods who have been hit by the neoliberal politics that have been battering it for the past 30 years, come out in hordes. Come out with your voting ballots to open up the door towards a future that so many generations before us have been fighting for. A future of harmony between people, an end of this sense of domination, social, cultural domination. A future built of harmony between mankind and nature. This is the page of history that you wanted to write when you went out and voted for the new popular social ecological union. So yes, in 10 days, if you decide otherwise, then prices will be blocked, the minimum wage will be increased, and we will bring in a whole gamut of measures. The 65-year retirement age will be put to debate, and the 800,000 contractual employees of the civil service, that also will be put up for debate. So this is how tonight I will be able to show you a tangible and a non-politically biased form of what we will do, because it is with great satisfaction that we see these results. This is the result of an historic agreement, an agreement that gave birth to our new socio-political, environmental, ecological union. So it is a sense that all of us, working together, it is coming to this agreement that we showed the French people that we are ready to govern, that we are ready to bring forward a political program with a sense of unity that has never wavered, no matter how many people tried to shake our foundations ever since we were created. So the new union, the popular, sociological, and ecological union, has a bright future ahead of it, because we have been able to campaign together, arm in arm. We were able to convince numerous people in France, because that is what a true democracy is about. You have to have the power to convince, and we did. Now, we have the rest of the journey ahead of us. Everyone in their respective circumscriptions will know what duty they have to play as Republicans, as Democrats. They will know how to vote. We have no doubt in our minds as to how intelligent people can be, and that they will act intelligently, and they will be able to set up the National Assembly accordingly, which is why we ask For those people who stood against us as part of the first round, we ask all of those people to look at this second round, not just in terms of political labels and political projects, but more so in terms of the general interest of our nation and the people of our nation. So we appeal to all to come out in hordes, decide for yourselves. Because millions of people so far who never would have thought that in the second round they would have had to have decided, given a decision that they will have to make in some 500 circumscriptions. So our union is proud because we have brought our program to the light of day and we have completed great works. We see the French people with a sense of peace of mind, knowing what a bright future is in store for us all. Long live the French Republic, long live France.
So we just heard the leader of France Unbowed, now the leader of the new Popular Alliance, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's not running himself, but who said clearly this is a major victory, a defeat for the presidential camp, and he's called people to come out next week in droves and vote for him and be able to gain a majority. He's hoping for it. Cole Stengler is in Marseille, where the top lieutenant of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Emmanuel Bompard, is running. They've probably been listening very intently to the words and even the gestures. We saw Jean-Luc Mélenchon raise his left fist to be able to convey his joy and his optimism.
Yeah, that's right. And much like Mélenchon, much like his tone, people are pretty enthused here. People are pretty happy about the projections, about the score that's projected again by the polls, not a final score. We heard Mélenchon himself say that more than 500 districts are in play for the second round. And again, as I was saying before, we heard it in Mélenchon's speech. The people here in La France Insoumise and the NUPES are less concerned about the overall seat projections. They see that as more hypothetical. They're more interested in those brute percentage numbers. And right now we have those projections that the NUPES, the New Popular Union coalition, and the presidential majority really running neck and neck. That's what they're most interested in. Now, off the record, privately, France Insoumise people were telling me they wanted perhaps even a bigger margin of advance. It's still a very good projection that we're having right now. And we heard also, I should say, in that speech that Mélenchon just gave, really aimed at sort of a more general audience, not aimed at the sort of left voters that he's been trying to unite in the first round. That was a sort of more national level speech aimed at really general voters to come out and try to position himself as sort of the candidate to oppose Macron. So that's the strategy that they're going to be running under. And I was just speaking with another activist here, asking them about how are they going to approach some of these second round races, because that's going to get interesting, where you have people, voters from maybe the far right, from Marine Le Pen's party, they're going to have to choose between a left candidate or a Macron candidate. And it's not so clear, according to activists here, how those people are going to vote. That question is going to come up a lot more. And again, the real tone we heard from Mélenchon in that speech was that he's ready to govern, they're ready to lead. And that's what I'm hearing on the ground here in Marseille as well.
Cole Stengler, obviously, Mélenchon believes that he can pull it off next Sunday, François.
All right, let's pick up in a moment on that point about what he's calling on people to do in races where his left-wing bloc is not in the picture. First, though, let's get a recap with France 24's Deeptika Laurent, who has been following those projections from our partners Ipsos.
Well, let's have a look at some of those scores. François, this is, of course, representing Emmanuel Macron's party. They're projected to get about 255 to 295 seats. Jean-Luc Mélenchon's left alliance, the one that he's leading, is on track to get 150 to 190 seats. And, of course, Marine Le Pen's party, the far-right party, projected to get about 20 to 45 seats, which is not a lot, but still more than the 15 necessary to form a parliamentary group. So that's good news for her. And just a final result there, this one here, the Republicans, that's the traditional Conservative Party, their score really confirming what's been a pretty spectacular fall from grace. Francois.
Yeah, decline for what was once one of the two big tent parties in France. Charlotte Mainvielle, just a reaction of something we heard in that speech by Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He called on voters in those constituencies where the left-wing alliance won't be represented to, quote, act intelligently. What does that mean? Does that mean vote for the party of Emmanuel Macron? Does that mean abstain? Does that mean vote for the far right?
Well, I can tell you what I believe, and what for sure what my party, the Green Party, recommends is we don't want one single vote to go to the Front National, to the Rassemblement National. So we have to do everything in our power to be able to ensure that the far right doesn't go through. So if that means using a vote to put to to Emmanuel Macron's party and coalition there, then that's what you have to do. I mean, the far right is really something we need to take very seriously, and in terms of our line as the Greens, we're very firm on that. We have to ensure that they don't get through to any second round.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, let me ask you. When Jean-Luc Mélenchon says, the presidential party was beaten, we scored more percentage points, but that doesn't translate into more seats at the National Assembly, as we just saw. So is he bluffing?
No, I think this result is really phenomenal and pretty unexpected. Well, what we have to do is really encourage everybody to mobilize and to go and vote. And actually, we've seen in the constituency that I'm representing that actually, compared to the first round, in the second round, there's been, on day 2 of voting, because we're voting online currently, there's been an increase of votes in the second round. So I think actually people will think we need to take this seriously. There's a real opportunity here for the president to not get a majority. There's a real chance for a future that is more green, that is more just, and that has more solidarity within it.
But you heard Alexandre Allroyd saying he's pro-European, he's pro-environment. Mm-hmm. What sets you apart?
Well, I think it's the facts. I mean, there's a lot of environmental discourse, but that when you look at the actions, actually, France has been condemned by its own justice system for climate inaction. France is the only European country that hasn't respected its own commitments in terms of investment in renewable energies. They've reintroduced pesticides such as, glyphosate and neonicotinoid, etc. So I think actually what proves, the point is what you do in action. The convention, the Citizens' Assembly on climate has been vastly ignored. They made a series of 149 compelling propositions, and there are only 10 of them that were put through without any filter, as was the expression of Macron. He said that he would put several of them through that were put through Parliament. So actually, if people here want to mobilize, listening to us for this second round, we need to really hammer that a new future is possible.
Alexandre Allroyd?
Well, I think that I completely agree that facts speaks louder than that actions speak louder than words. And the truth is, Jean-Luc Mélenchon is a renowned Eurosceptic. The truth is, we voted a text in the Assembly, the Aix-la-Chapelle Treaty. He voted against it very clearly. Actually, for the last 25 years, he's built his whole career being anti-European, and he's now at the head of the coalition. And you intend to make him prime minister. You intend to put a prime minister, a Eurosceptic prime minister, at the head of our country. I think it's very clear. As for the different points that you mentioned about environment, I'm not going to go for every one of them, but just on the condemnation of the state, it was condemned under the period of the previous government, which you supported, because back then you were a supporter of the Socialist Party. Now we're Green and aligned with the new France Insoumise alliance, and you've transitioned. But the truth is, it isn't this government who's been...
It's also this government.
It's actually the state under the previous government, a government that you supported. And I'd like to clarify a couple of points which were made, because I think it's very important. It's been said that this is the first time that an outgoing president is in this situation. It is, because it is the first time that actually an outgoing president gets re-elected and is in the capacity to win a majority. I think it's very, in the Fifth Republic. You mentioned François Hollande. He actually, which you supported at the time, he actually couldn't run again. So yes, he didn't find himself in the situation. Neither did Sarkozy, who lost. Neither did Chirac, who lost his majority in '97. So just as a historical perspective, I think it's important to note that. But the key point here is that in the coming week, there is going to be a fundamental opposition. I don't have the numbers, but from what I understand, there's about 500 constituencies where NUPES is qualified for the second round. I think the figures around Ensemble is about the same. So there's going to be two fundamental projects put to the French. One, which will crush the French with taxation, which will put a Europhobic prime minister at the helm of the French state. One, which will resoundingly and confidently continue to build growth in our country, to be able to sponsor and support our social system while engaging in the green transition. That's the big choice which the French have for the week. And there was one point of agreement. I think we have to mobilize everyone so that the French make this decisive choice for their future.
Disagree.
Yes, I think it's interesting to see how Mr. Elroyd is doing a lot of caricaturing of our program and of our candidates, really. And actually, there was an article in AFP this week saying how much the current government is actually saying misleading things about our alliance. I think that's completely false around Euroscepticism. My values, for example, are truly European, and actually, it's having faith in Europe and loving Europe. When you want to make it more environmental and more in favor of social justice and protecting more of our human rights.
Can I just ask one question?
And that's what we're after, And I think I totally agree that there's a choice between two projects here, and there is a project of hope, and there's a project of doing what we've done for the past 5 years, which clearly is not working and leaving a lot of more vulnerable people behind. We've seen, during the COVID crisis, that student poverty has increased, and there's been absolutely nothing that's been done to protect them. Your party has refused on several occasions to actually give a minimum level of support for people under 25, to give any kind of support to students during that time. So, actually this climate inaction is really yours. And a lot of the votes that you've done in Parliament demonstrate that. You voted against reducing VAT on public transportation. You voted against suppressing internal flights when an alternative of trains was available. You haven't invested enough in trains and that kind of transportation. So I think really we have the choice between two kinds of futures here, and that's the real divide.
Well, I think the vote pattern is inaccurate, actually. The truth is we're the first majority to ban some flights when there is an equivalent in
a minimized way.
No, but we're the first majority to have done it, including your majority, which you supported the last time around. But I think the key point here is when you're accusing me of caricaturing, to some extent, of misleading the public. So there's a very clear question. In the House of Parliament, every year we vote a budget for the European Union. How many times did Jean-Luc Mélenchon vote that budget?
Well, I think that's not the point. What you're trying to do.
It's a very important point.
What you're trying to do is really
and this is acts.
To stick.
It's not language.
No, but actually, I think there's a different vision of the economy that you're trying to do. The economy is just a tool, and actually, this obsession with wanting to stick to this deficit rule doesn't obviously have to be the only way.
Well,
actually,
we have to have the EU.
But financing the EU, of course, is fundamental, and we want a stronger EU, and that's what I'm in favor of.
Why did your leader vote against it every year?
My leader is also, my leader is a leader of the Green Party. And what's important in this alliance is actually that within our parliamentary groups, we also stay within our parliamentary groups. But everything we'll do is to reinforce the European project. And you've been misleading when you've said that we want to try to go in another direction. We want to reinforce the European Union. We want to make it more fair, and we want to make it more green.
You seem to really disagree with the person you're trying to put in.
All right, we're going to cross over to James Andre in Paris. James, you're in front of the headquarters of, again, what was known before as the Gaullist Party, one of those big tent parties, Les Républicains. So I guess it's a case of good news and bad news. The bad news is they're going to have a lot fewer seats in Parliament. The good news is they may have cut some of their losses.
Yeah, absolutely. The big question for the Les Républicains party was its actual survival after the very bad result of Valérie Pécresse, who was their champion in the presidential election in April. She didn't make it to the 5% bar and had to ask money to the members of the party in order to pay her debts off for that campaign. Now, the question was, will Les Républicains survive? Les Républicains was, the Republicans party was the the most most important opposition force in the French Parliament, with around 100 seats. But with this election, for starters, there are about 20 outgoing members of Parliament that were not representing themselves simply because they had retired. They also had simply a group of parliamentarians that had decided to rejoin the party of Emmanuel Macron. And then there was about 71 outgoing MPs that were representing themselves in their various circumscriptions. Well, indeed, we have tonight an estimation about 50 to 80 seats. So basically, Les Républicains saving themselves, but not a very good result tonight for them.
James Andre reporting live in Paris's 15th arrondissement.
Yes, and we have a result from a former minister, the education minister, Jean-Michel Blanquer, who was running for the very first time in the Loiret region. Well, he lost in the second round.
First round.
In the first round, sorry. We're in the first round.
So he's eliminated straight
He's
up.
eliminated straight away, yes.
Wow.
He tried politics and he'll maybe go back to education world.
Let me ask a question to you, Mario Darieux. Your first political family, even though you're not a political novice at age 22, you've campaigned in the past at Les Républicains. What made you quit that party?
Well, I think you can see this is very striking with the results today, that this is the end of Les Républicains. And for one very obvious and simple cause for me is that they don't have a clear political line anymore. They have completely betrayed the right and the voters. And this is why I think these results are the sign that it is the end of Les Républicains. And I think that's why it's a great source of hope for my party and Reconquête, which is the sign that we will be the future political party on the right, the first one, the real and only right-wing party. Because
that's not what the initial results are showing. In fact, you heard our correspondent saying that it could be the end of Reconquête already.
No, I don't believe it. I think it's only the beginning. We will have to be patient. I think it's a great success that we have been able to present 550 candidates everywhere in France and abroad. But obviously, this calls to humility, and we will keep on working and rooting our politicians and myself everywhere in France. But you can tell that the Républicains are about to disappear, and so Reconquête will be there to take over.
Well, there's only one slight problem, is that the National Rally performed well in the presidential election. They seem to have performed better than usual at this legislative elections. We'll have to wait for round two. And basically, you've tried to challenge them. It seems they won.
Well, what I can see again now is that Marine Le Pen, as usual, rejoices over results that are always lower than expected. And so we will see in a week's time what happens. But probably she will find herself with very few members of parliaments. And
what if your leader loses?
That is not the question. Reconquête will continue. Of course, it is better if we have member of parliaments, but we will continue nonetheless. And I think Marine Le Pen will be very disappointed, and she will see that this system is very unfair. Because I'd like to stress that Emmanuel Macron 5 years ago had promised to implement the proportional representation, and this hasn't taken place. And I think French people know this is a very unfair system, and that their votes is not represented in the end. And so this is what accounts for the massive abstention.
Alexandre Leroy, do you agree that there needs to be a reform of the system, that with these 577 separate seats, including the one that all three of you ran for, effectively it shuts out parties that can get 20-30% of the vote sometimes?
I think it's unquestionable that there's a very important question to be in terms of democratic participation, that parties which are main parties in France are underrepresented in the National Assembly. The President has committed to launching a mechanism to try and open this question.
And for you personally, what would be the best system?
It's very clear that it's a necessity. Then it requires a lot of consultation, a lot of work, because there are very different ways of introducing proportional representation to a House. There's a whole array of ways, but it's very clear that a step has to be made in that direction. And we tried to. We tried to present a constitutional reform, which was blocked by the opposition to go in that direction. And so I think it has to be quite clear that we tried to. It's very clear that there has to be a broad debate among specialists. It's a very complex question. But at the end of it has to come out a House which is more representative of the wider French political scene, undeniably.
Charlotte Maviel.
Well, first, I'd like to say that I'm quite pleased that the Minister of Education has lost his seat, because I think it's been a catastrophe. His term, Parcoursup, this student platform, has been a real difficulty for a lot of students, and he's had a terrible track record. So, in terms of proportional representation, yes, I think we do need to make a move in that direction for sure, because we need to have a more equal, more democratic representation of what citizens' views and perspectives are, and they need to be truly included and listened to. Another important reform I think that we need is to move a bit away from this presidential system and move to a sixth republic, where the parliament actually has more weight, and that's the case in a lot of the.
But what does that mean? What kind of a system does this? Is it a full proportional representation? Is it a mix, which is what we had in France in 1986? What do you personally?
I think that needs to be discussed, and we need to get a range of perspectives from parliamentarians and from citizens to see exactly what that would look at. But I think in any case, a system where the parliament has more weight and the president has less weight, and where these elections actually, there's a low turnout here, but I think it's also because these elections have been minimized. A lot of people turn out for the presidential elections, less people turn out for the parliamentary elections, and it should be the other way around. Where we live in the UK, for example, or where I live in the UK, the parliament has more weight, and I think that's a fairer system.
Charlotte Maviel, Alexandre Holroyd, and Margot Daillot, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck to the two of you for the runoff next Sunday. Let's cross now to the French Prime Minister, speaking after she ran in Normandy in the first round of these elections.
Militants who were active throughout this campaign, because they played the game, they accepted the rules of our democracy. And personally, I would like to thank all those people who live in the 6th circumscription in Calvados for having put me in the lead of the first round. Today, half of the electors did not go to vote, and this raises an issue, is that we need to push back these low figures of turnout. So we need to reform our institutions, and we need to bring back dialogue with all of society, and with our government, and with the majority. I will continue to act and provide tangible solutions that respond to all of the hardship that people are facing and prepare for the future. To all of those people who did not vote.
I'm good.
Yeah. But how are you doing? Oh, we're back in the studio. We're going to try to cross back over to the headquarters there of the Elisabeth Borne, who's been speaking. She is ahead in her first round, after the first round. Let's cross
people
back
who
now.
supported us in this first time. We are now one of the leading political forces to take over the majority of the National Assembly. So we have 1 week ahead of us, a week of mobilization, a week to convince, a week to be able to obtain a strong, clear majority. And only with a strong and clear majority will we be able to deal with the emergency situations that are currently hitting our French people hard, and for us to be able to prepare for the future. To be able to properly tackle the issues such as the war that is on our doorstep, the only way to tackle that is with a clear majority. And to be able to tackle extremism, we need a clear voice. And therefore, I call on all of those people who believe in the Republican ideals to vote for our candidates in the second round. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the coming week, beyond political labels, there are values that unite us: freedom, equality, fraternity, and laïcité. These are the values that we will continue to uphold, as we have always done. Because as has never been seen before in our political history, we are faced with a large mix of extremist ideals, and we will never stand aside and let the extremism take over. So we will continue to defend social progress, the sovereignty of our own nation and our republic. Let us not forget, social progress is not economic decline, and the freedom for enterprise is a way of creating future jobs and defending our social construct. Social progress, it is not just one of things that are forbidden and additional taxes. It is a way of ensuring that no one is left to the wayside. National sovereignty, it is not breaking away from Europe. It is not giving in to this fascination for authoritarian regimes. It is a strong nation within a more independent Europe. And a republic, it is not just simply challenging and questioning our institutions. Our republic, it is not pitting one French person against the other for religious, for their religion, for their social background, or their economic status. It is a republic based on equality for all. So, ladies and gentlemen, fellow citizens, to be able to act, to be able to implement the policy from the French president, we need a strong, committed majority. So therefore, in the coming days, like myself, all of the candidates of the presidential majority will continue to work together to bring our project to life, a project based on stronger purchasing power, on an environmentally conscientious nation, a nation with full employment for all. So in face of these extremist policies on the rise, we need to stand up against them. So I would call on all men and women, voters, to vote according to their values and to defend their values. Long live France, long live the French Republic.
French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne in her first ever political campaign, finishing ahead against the candidate of the new Popular Union left-wing coalition, but by 5 points. Delano de Souza, who has been listening in to that speech. Borne, who goes to a second round.
That's right, Elizabeth Borne going to a second round next week. She managed to secure about 32% of the vote in the first round today. This is the first time she has ever run for public office. Elizabeth Borne did speak about the low turnout, the historically low turnout for these legislative elections, and she said that that is a problem. Clearly, things still up in the air for the Ensemble or Together coalition, centre-right coalition going for these legislative elections, because estimates show that they could get between 255 to 295 seats in the National Assembly, and of course they need that magic number of 289 seats out of the 577 if they want to keep the majority in Parliament. They need that majority in Parliament to push through reforms which the President has promised, reforms which include reforming the country's pension system. Now, if the Together coalition fails to cobble together that majority in Parliament, then what we're going to see is 5 years of policy paralysis here in France, where nothing is going to make it through Parliament, because it's most likely will be blocked by the opposition, or by the ruling party, sorry.
Delano de Souza, many thanks for that live update. We'll be crossing in as those estimates keep coming in and become actual results. Yes, you're watching France 24 on election night. The polls closing 1 hour ago. First round of legislative elections. François Picard with Mark Perlman. Let's cross to Deeptika Laurent, who's at the big board. Projections from our partners Ipsos showing that there's all to play for when it comes to Emmanuel Macron securing a majority next Sunday.
That's right, Francois. It's still very much up in the air. Let's have a look at some of those results. Emmanuel Macron's party picking up, projected to pick up 255 to 295 seats. In fact, we're getting some of the results of individual constituencies, and we know that Damien Abad, his Minister for Solidarity, is on track with to a second round with 33% against a candidate from that left-leaning coalition led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon. That coalition is projected to pick up about 150 to 190 seats, while you have Marine Le Pen's National Rally, the far-right party, on track to get about 20 to 45 seats. It might not seem like a lot, but it's still well above the 50 needed to form a parliamentary group, so that at least is good news for her. But of course, a big number, The magic number is 289. That is one more than half needed to get that much coveted majority in the National Assembly, Francois.
Indeed, Tika, Laurent, Mark Perlman, more results coming in.
More results coming in. We just learned that the far-right pundit, Éric Zemmour, who was running for the very first time in the South, has been eliminated from the race in the first round. This was just published by the local authorities there. He tried to become president, then he tried to become MP. It didn't work both times. Here we're saying a minister who's been mired in controversy, Damien Abad, who has been accused of rape. He's nevertheless still in government and is ahead in his region where he was already elected MP before, 33.4%. He is ahead of the candidate of the new Popular Union on the left, Florence Pisani, who's 10% behind him. The National Rally candidate is nearing 20%. So a lot will depend on what the voters who voted for the National Rally will do in the second round. So good situation for Damien Abad, but his seat is not secure, obviously. And we know the rule, dictated by Emmanuel Macron. If you're a government minister, you need to win. If not, you're out.
All right, Mark Perlman, many thanks. I want to welcome our guests for this next hour on election night, first round here in France. So let's say hello to first Daniel Obono, member of Parliament, running for re-election, incumbent member of Parliament. Too early for results yet?
Yeah, it's close at 8, so we'll wait a couple of hours.
We'll keep an eye on your race. You're with the Unbowed France Party, and thus with this new Popular Union coalition on the left. With us as well, Léa Chamboncel, host of the Popol Politics podcast, and pollster and data scientist Rémi Louf. Welcome back to all of you. First off, your reaction to the speech by the Prime Minister, warning of that the second round would be, framing it as a fight against extremism.
Yeah, whatever. The fact is that the big news tonight is that our coalition is ahead or slightly ahead, and that's what nobody expected. I think.
What do you mean by ahead? Because a number of seats you're behind.
Yeah, but in percentage, we succeed. What we wanted to do was to make this coalition, and millions of people decided to vote for us. So this is the main news, I think, tonight. We think that the government made everything possible for people not to get interested in this election. I heard the Prime Minister complaining about the low turnout, but she is the one in charge who was supposed to make sure that people is aware that there's an election. And so actually they like that there's such a low turnout because they expect that they will win because people won't participate. So for us now, the challenge is so many people didn't take part in this election because they didn't realize how big the possibility was for us to actually win. And now we just proved that it is possible to be a majority against all odds. But we already managed to get this far, and now in a week time we could actually win a majority if the million of people who didn't participate in this election for the first round, those are millions who can actually change the future of this country, and those are the voters we are going to try to appeal in the next days, because they can actually change the course of history in this country. If we are a majority, we can actually change everything with the way the country is being ruled.
But do you seriously believe that Jean-Luc Mélenchon can be France's next prime minister?
Yes, we
seriously,
do.
Without campaigning,
No, but that's the way. I mean, we've been asked the same thing during the presidential election. Did we believe that?
It's a different election.
Yeah, it's a different, but the goal is the same. The goal is to change everything. Because
just to remind our viewers, the magic number is 289 to have a majority in the parliament, and right now our Ipsos projection has your coalition falling 100 seats shy. That's a big number.
Yes, but we still, I mean, we're still in the running. We have over 400, I mean, close to 500 candidates who are at the second round right now. And as I said, I think our margin is with the people who didn't vote. We have a big abstention, and those are the people, young people, working class people, who we can appeal. So I think that's the goal is still for Jean-Luc Mélenchon to be prime minister, and I think it's something we can do. We've been told that it was impossible for us to get together. This new popular union, everybody said that we would never manage to get to agree on anything. We did, and just like Jean-Luc Mélenchon had 22% at the presidential election, and nobody expected him to be so close to the second round. I think we can also appeal to the million of people who didn't vote in order for us to get our 289 MP elected and win a majority.
Okay, we can now cross to northern France, to Hénin-Beaumont, where Jean-Luc Mélenchon ran, but was defeated a few years ago against Marine Le Pen, who is on course to be re-elected. Alison Sargent is standing by with a member of Marine Le Pen's national rally, Arnaud de Rignan, who's a member of the city council of the northern town of Carvin. Thank you very much for being with us. Obviously, Jean-Luc Mélenchon is hoping to become France's next prime minister. What is the reaction to that optimism?
What's your reaction to the optimism from Jean-Luc Mélenchon?
Actually, I don't know, but I can say that I think that he will not be the next prime minister because they had maybe a result at the first turn, but how many voters from the first turn will gonna vote for him? I don't know. Maybe a very few number of votants. I think that Marine Le Pen and his party did a very good result because it's 19%, more than 6 points. More than 2017, and also Marine on his territory is 10 points better than 5 years ago.
But what about the fact that Marine Le Pen turnout was so low that she still has to go through and have a second round of this election? What does that say about her popularity here? Clearly, people aren't that excited to come out and vote for her.
But she had also a second turn 5 years ago, and she was just at 46%, now 55%. So we see that it's a very good result for her. We will see at the second turn, but it's not a bad result. We are very satisfied, and also for the national result, and also for the local result.
It's not nearly, though, the score that we saw that left-wing new coalition get, even though Marine Le Pen and your party want to be the first opposition party against Macron. It seems like clearly that place has been taken by the left. What do you have to say to that?
But we saw that Marine is the first opponent to Macron, because at the presidential election she did 42%. She did very good results, clearly better than 2017, clearly better also than the election before, and she grew up election after election. So we see in this election that we will have more deputy than before. Just 10 years ago, we had no deputies. In 2017, we had something like 7 or 8 deputies. Now we see that we can have really more than 10 or maybe 20 deputies. We will see.
And is there any party that Marine Le Pen would be willing to work with at the National Assembly?
Oh, actually not, because we can see any party who is friendly with us, and also we are, as we have a really better score than before, we can do our work at the next parliament. It will be no problem for us.
Okay, Arnaud Dorigny, thank you so much. As you can see there, Mark, a lot of optimism from Marine Le Pen's supporters, realistic about this score, which is right about what they were expecting. It's not maybe as amazing as it could have been, but all that they see in Marine Le Pen's electoral history is just steady upward progress.
Alison Sargent reporting from Hénin-Beaumont. Thank you very much. Rémi Louf, let me ask you, we have basically two parallel realities. You have Elisabeth Borne saying, you know, we're the only party or the only coalition about to get a majority in parliament. We have Jean-Luc Mélenchon saying the party has been defeated. We won the election. So it's a little bit strange for people who watch. They say, I won. Who won, actually?
Well, you know, for now, they can both be correct, and I think they both have good arguments in their favor. First, I mean, if you just look at the numbers that are here with the number of seats, LREM got 255, between 255 and 295, which is, you know, apparently the biggest goal. But on the other hand, this is from Ipsos, right?
Yes.
And Ipsos, this is based on their previous polls, and they polled actually higher, like the last polls on Ipsos. So they're actually losing ground compared to the polls as numbers will come during the night. These numbers will keep being updated, I think. And in that sense, the left is also right in thinking that, you know, they might get closer. We don't know, but they might get closer. And earlier we said that there was a lot of uncertainty in polling, and that's what
Jean-Luc
allowed...
Mélenchon even said those seat projections are worth nothing.
I wouldn't say they're worth nothing. I would say there is a huge uncertainty. Like, they didn't poll at 10 seats. Like, the polls gave them... I mean, they gave them about that. They gave them, like, between 150 and 190, and I think the real range is more between 130 and 230 something. I mean, I'm like, don't quote me on that number, but I think it's way wider than this.
You're on TV, so you're quoted, actually.
Yeah. And on the other hand, so, you know, we'll know tomorrow. But the RN has very good reasons to be optimistic about these results, because they just keep, it's like a steady upward slope in terms of scores. Like, people thought that they would do much worse at this election than they actually did. And even more surprising is that when you look at correlation between RN vote and turnout, usually low turnout is really bad for them. And this time there's really the lowest turnout we've ever seen in these elections, and they still score pretty well. So I think that's why the person we saw was very, very optimistic about these results.
Let me ask as well to you, Léon Chamboncel. The results are starting to materialize. The battle lines are drawn. When you look, though, is France basically a conservative country? I ask the question because if you looked in numbers of total votes, there isn't much of a ceiling left for the left.
Well, I wouldn't say France is a conservative country. I would say voters for legislative elections, because as we were talking before, it's usually older people, more into like, pretty wealthy, and these kind of people obviously don't have any reason for the change that we're actually a few young people are pushing through. So yeah, this type of person voting for this election.
So young people are not voting for the change young people are demanding.
Well, not really. Well, I don't know. We don't have yet the projection on abstention and how the youth went to vote or not on this election. I do believe youth didn't mobilize that much. And what we see from the previous election is often people that are older, over 60. So people over 60 obviously don't want change. You know,
those are the votes you need.
This is mainly the vote you need.
That's when Jean-Luc Mélenchon...
Young people, the unemployed, working class people, because those are the people who didn't go to the poll today. They didn't vote, and obviously those are the millions of people I was talking about that will benefit our program to be implemented. And if we had the majority, and we have to convince them to go to the second round and make this, shift in the projection.
But what you see also, if I might answer the question entirely, what is interesting here is the results is that the majority that Emmanuel Macron might have is between 255 seats and 295 seats.
What's the number of seats? 289 is the magic number.
Yeah. It's a huge difference. I mean, if you go down to 255, it has a relative majority. In 1988, when François Mitterrand was re-elected, they had elections in 1988, and the Socialist Party got only 275 seats. And it was quite tricky for a while, during 3 years. Rocard and Edith Cresson also had to be dealing with the Communist parties. So if the majority of the president now doesn't get 289 seats, it's going to be very interesting to see how they're going to be able to pass the law they want to pass without a very strong majority. The thing is that what's interesting is to see that between 1988 and 1991, Rocard used the Article 49.3, sorry.
It's effectively, you get to railroad through legislation.
28 times. So,
but you can't do as much anymore today.
Yeah, it's because the Constitution was reformed. But still, I mean, I am a bit afraid of what things can happen also if the president doesn't have a majority in the assembly, like a very steady and, like strong majority. So, yeah, the results can tell us in a way that French people are a bit conservative because they didn't, well, there again, it's a projection. They didn't make a big change. Well, it's still Emmanuel Macron majority that is leading for now. So wait and see, I would say.
All right. Rémi Louf was mentioning how the far right has improved on its score. And if turnout, one of the big surprises of the night is the low turnout normally doesn't favor them. It did in this case. Of course, there's more than one far right. Marine Le Pen's party is what we were referring to. Let's cross now to France 24's Alexander Alcade, who's on the French Riviera in Saint-Tropez, where the presidential candidate, the TV pundit Éric Zemmour, was running and was eliminated on the night, Alexander.
Yes, indeed. It's a bit of a shock. We saw that it was going to be very tight as things came through. He was supposed to speak at 8:20, and that was prolonged as we were trying to see if he would make it through to the second round. We now have that confirmation that he's come in third behind Cyril Mabon from the Le République En Marche, President Macron's party, who won 28.5% of the vote. And in the second round, she'll face the National Rally's Philippe Latteo. Now, I'm actually right next to Cyril Mabon, the winner in the first round right now, so we can cross to her. And what does this result mean for your party in this election so far?
I'm sorry, but I'm 29. I'm very proud, very happy and very proud, because for me, a small member of parliament, it was a big challenge, and I'm very, very proud because I was in responsibility, very efficient, and I work a lot during 5 years. And at this moment, the election is a congrats for these 5 years of big work.
And you've got rid of one of the most talked about candidates in Éric Zemmour, who's lurched to the far right. What does it mean that he hasn't managed to make it through to the second round, do you think?
No, it was very difficult for him to be at the second round because here the National Rassemblement from Marine Le Pen is very, very high. Then it was difficult for him to make it better.
Thank you very much for being with us. You've been very patient.
Thank you.
Right. So, thanks. So, yeah, Éric Zemmour, he hasn't made it through, and that's sort of the reason why we came here, to see what would happen with his movement. And I was speaking to his followers around the corner earlier, where they're all together in a place. There's actually probably 50-50 journalists and supporters. So there's a very small crowd of very strong supporters for Éric Zemmour here. There was a mixture of feelings. Some of them saying it's the second catastrophe after he didn't make it to the second round of the presidential election, but a sizable number saying that actually, considering that he came through as a political newcomer just a few months ago without an official political party, he's made incredible progress, and they've got hope for the candidate already in his 60s that the next time round in 5 years he'll be able to do much better.
Alexander Alcott reporting live from Saint-Tropez. Mark Perman, I know you have more results, but just a quick word on that one. She may have come tops in the first round, but when I see that the far right together is nearly 50%, it's going to be an uphill battle for her to get elected.
It's going to be an uphill battle, but it's going to be very interesting politically, given the rivalry that has emerged between the National Rally and Éric Zemmour's party. They're not in talking terms, so we'll see whether the votes will translate. Yes, if you do the math, the National Rally candidate should win, but it's much more complicated, and it's complicated in all of the 577 races. The dynamics are very different.
And you have more results for us, Mark.
Yes, we're going to see a few results. Let's see what comes up first on the screen. It's Marine Le Pen, I believe, who is running for re-election in the north of France. 54%. She wins. As far as we understand, the turnout, however, is not high enough, so she will need to confirm this victory in the second round next Sunday, because you need more than 25% of voters in each constituency. But nevertheless, she's a shoo-in. She was re-elected. Last time she got 46% in the first round. She did need a second round to win, but it's a clear victory for Marine Le Pen. Let's now turn to one of the leaders of Emmanuel Macron's party, Christophe Castaner, who is the head of the La République En Marche group in the National Assembly. He is ahead, but only very slightly ahead, not even 1% of Léo Walter, the candidate of the leftist New Popular Union, and they come ahead of the National Rally candidate Aurélie Abeille. So a lot of uncertainty. Christophe Castaner thought that he was previously a socialist MP and that it would be easy for him, but it's not that easy. A lot will depend on, again, in many of the races, turnout and the local dynamics in his constituency in the Alpes-de-Haute-Provence.
All right, Christophe Castaner there, who is going to have an uphill battle, perhaps. Daniel Obono, when you look at at some of the results, and we heard, by the way, Jean-Luc Mélenchon in his speech calling on voters to choose intelligently. Let me find the exact quote. I think that was it. Got a lot of notes here. To choose intelligently. And he was talking about races where the left is not in the second rounds. When you see, for instance, that race in Saint-Tropez, would you tell people to abstain or to vote for the candidate backed by Emmanuel Macron?
Of course, what we said during the previous election cycle, the presidential election, there should be no vote for the far right. Especially, it's good news that Éric Zemmour got beaten at the first round. But
in this case, abstaining would mean the far right gets a seat in power.
As I said, our task in the next few days will be to mobilize people. We want people to go to vote because they can actually change the course of the future of this country. So we will mobilize people to go to vote everywhere, and as we've been doing during the previous election. So there's no, to us, one vote for the far right, whether it's Marine Le Pen's or Éric Zemmour, is one vote too many. So we will make sure that there's no vote for them, and hopefully they won't even get enough to get a group. I would just say that we want to focus on the around 500 constituency where we have a candidate, and for instance, you showed Christophe Castaner was not even 1% ahead of our candidate, who is a known young man. Christophe Castaner was the president of the La République En Marche party, which he was the
interior minister.
Yeah, and he was the interior minister, and you wondered if France was a conservative party, country, sorry. And I said maybe the electorate who voted today, but I think people remember that Christophe Castaner was the interior minister during the Yellow Vest movement, and is responsible for over 300 people getting injured during this time. And I think that's something that we will remind people everywhere what the 5 past years have been for working class people. And so we're going to mobilize and showing that the far right is no answer to the daily struggles they face, and we are the answer to them.
All right, we heard earlier the speech by Marine Le Pen, who in working class districts is vying for the same votes as you are. And she big cried what we saw happen at the Stade de France. I take it she wasn't expressing solidarity with Liverpool Football Club supporters when she made those remarks. It was because there were people who got mugged at the stadium. She wasn't. I can only assume that she was not calling out police brutality. Léa Chamboncel, what's a political vote getter in France in 2022? Calling out police brutality? Or warning of hordes of thugs?
Well, that's I guess it depends on who you want to talk to. You know, so what's your target basically? And what's interesting with Marine Le Pen when she said that is that she tries to target obviously the people from the Yellow Vest that were marked a lot by, the government and also all the abuses that you were pointing out. But it's also a way for her to make sure that she doesn't get the policemen because we know that a lot of people from the police do vote for Rassemblement National. So it's a way also of making sure she doesn't upset anyone in a sort of a way, just taking the responsibility on the Minister of Interior, basically, I would say.
All right, Léa Chamboncel. Let's, if you're just joining us here on France 24, give you a reminder. We're coming up on 9:30 p.m. in the French capital. Polls closed some 90 minutes ago in the first round of legislative elections, all to play for Diptyque Laurent when it comes to next Sunday's runoff, and it's perhaps closer than some predicted.
It is indeed. Let's show you some of those results, Francois. This is Emmanuel Macron's party projected to win about 255 to 295 seats. The Left Alliance, that's led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, they're on track to get about 150 to 190 seats. And of course, the other big party we're looking at is Marine Le Pen's far-right party, the National Rally, who are on track to get about 20 to 45 seats, well above the 15 needed to form a parliamentary group, which is definitely good news for Marine Le Pen and her party. We do have some individual constituencies as well. We can show you Damien Abad, that's Emmanuel Macron's Minister for Solidarity. Now he's picked up 33.38%, which means he goes off into that second round runoff against a candidate from Jean-Luc Mélenchon's left coalition. We have Marc Fesneau, who is the Agriculture Minister for Emmanuel Macron. He's picked up 31.97%, which means he too is into a second round runoff. Of course, these results are important because Emmanuel Macron has told his ministers that if they don't win their seat, well, then they will lose their ministership. So that's why these results are important. And we have Fabien Roussel, who's the leader of the Communist Party, also into a second round runoff now with 34.13% of the votes.
Diptyque Laurent, many thanks.
And we can now cross south to Marseille. Cole Stangler is following the campaign of Manuel Bompard, the top lieutenant of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Cole, I believe you have a guest.
Yeah, that's right. We're in the headquarters here of Manuel Bompard and the NUPES coalition. Here with Frédéric, who's an activist with La France Insoumise for over 3 years. We're going to talk a little bit about the score. What do you make of this result so far?
Actually, this result gives us a real satisfaction because for us it's been a reward of our work as activists on the spot, and also our candidates like Manuel Bompard, Mohamed Ben Saad, Sébastien Delogu did such a wonderful campaign on the spot. They went everywhere, they met every people they could meet, they did everything they could, and I think it's just a fair reward.
Right. So we've heard that Manuel Bompard, who was just here, was speaking about how the NUPES coalition, the left coalition, is now the top political force in France. It's still looking pretty tight, though, with if you look at the projections right now. Is that really a fair thing to say that you're the top political force in France today? Do you believe that?
Absolutely, I do believe it, because right now, in France, some of the little towns have voting places that close at 6 p.m. But in bigger towns like Marseille, Paris, Lyon, Bordeaux, these places close at 8 p.m. So now our activists are counting the votes, and we are waiting for the results to come back to us. And I think this result will give us a much better rate.
That's right. So we'll see how those results come in again later this evening in Marseille. We're still waiting on those results for the 7 districts in the city of Marseille, which should give a good indication also of how good the left coalition is doing nationally as well. And we'll keep you posted as the evening progresses.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Cole Stengler in Marseille.
Let's cross back to Delano de Souza, who's at the headquarters of Emmanuel Macron's Together party. We heard that speech earlier by the Prime Minister. She is into the second round in the constituency where she's running in Normandy. A lot of other races you're watching, though.
That's right, Francois. I'm actually standing with Pierre-Alexandre Anglade, somebody who's a sitting member of Parliament and who is running for French citizens living abroad, who has come in first place in what he's representing with 39% of the vote. And he's here with me now. How are you feeling tonight?
Well, it's an important moment for the country, because French people are searching for a majority in the Parliament, and so we are present in most of the constituencies for the second round of this election. So we are focused. We want to mobilize our electorate for the second round to give a clear and strong majority to the president next week.
We had a historically low turnout today. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's never good. It's not good for democracy. So we need to mobilize people. We need to convince people, and we need to explain the time we are living in. It's a time of challenges in Europe, in France, in Ukraine, and so you need to have a strong majority to decide. And so this is what is at stake next week.
The far left coalition has done surprisingly well today.
Well, they are high, that's true, but that's why they did this coalition. But if you look at their project, they don't share anything together on Europe. They don't have the same project on economy. They don't have the same project on energy and climate change. And so basically, if they will arrive in charge next week, it will be only division and the blockade of the country. So we need to mobilize to have a clear and strong majority next week.
What does it say to you that Emmanuel Macron won the presidency just in April by a large percentage versus Marine Le Pen, and tonight the far left has come out pretty neck and neck with the Together or the Ensemble centre-right coalition? Does that mean the French public, don't want Emmanuel Macron ruling the country with a free hand? They want to keep him in check?
I think the French people said very clearly what they wanted last April. They elected Emmanuel Macron without any doubt, instead of what said Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Mélenchon said that there was no clear support for the president. There is a clear support for the president in the country. Now we are in this election. There are 2 rounds. And so we will count the MPs next week. But everyone says tonight that Mr. Mélenchon and his coalition is doing a very high score. Well, if you put all together the different parties which are part of this coalition, they are lower than what they were at the presidential election. So all in all, next week the French people will have to make a very clear choice between the pro-European parties and those who want to defeat Europe, between those who want to strengthen our economy and those who want to weaken the country.
What if next week you don't manage to get the 289 seats in Parliament? What are we going to have? 5 years of policy paralysis in France?
Well, I think what is at stake is very important. It's the way the country goes for the next 5 years, and we need to have a clear majority in order to implement the project of the French president. If there is no majority, then it will be the blockade of the country. It is as clear as I say it to you. There is no way out. And when the people say they want to balance the power, there is no balance of power. Or you have a majority, a clear majority for the president, or you block the country. It's as simple as that.
Pierre-Alexandre Anglade, thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24. So there you heard it from the Together or the Ensemble centre-right coalition here in France. Clearly, the next week is going to be crucial. They need those 289 seats to secure the majority in Parliament. Otherwise, we're going to have 5 years of policy paralysis in the country.
Or lots of deal-making after that second round. Many thanks, Delano de Souza. Daniel Obono, you heard there Pierre-Alexandre Anglade talk about the importance of pro-European parties banding together. Right now, a lot of our viewers are dismayed at Brexit. They're worried about war in Ukraine. And he was saying, in your coalition, not everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet.
But that's a lie, because we managed to build a strong platform about with over 600 political measures that we will implement. And even on the subject that was said to be very touchy, that we would never manage to get to agree on, we did agree on about the European Union. We agreed on the fact that we will implement our program and we will use the opt-out measures that do exist in the European Union in order to do so, and we will talk with our partners in Europe in order to push for a European Union that should take, for instance, climate change as a central feature of our policy rather than free market being the only measure of prosperity. So we agreed on the European Union what we would do.
You agreed, but you glossed over important differences, most notably France's role in NATO.
Yeah.
Where your party is not aligned with the socialists or the
but
Greens
we were very clear. I think you should acknowledge that it's an act of honesty toward the people, saying that of course there are a few things that we don't agree on, or we have different approaches of the problems, and then we will let the National Assembly do its work. After all, isn't it the idea of democracy to debate and even to disagree on issues? But if 99% of our program we agree on, that will be implemented, and then the few things, and they are on for instance on NATO and other issues, on nuclear power and a few others, then let's the democracy actually decide. Let's the social movement push in the right direction. So that's in total honesty. There's no glossing over. But what we're saying and what is true is that 99% of our platform could be implemented tomorrow. There are over 150 economists who actually studied and support our program. So it's not something that is out of utopian brain that design it. So it's something that can be implemented, and we will together, if we are a majority in the National Assembly, do it.
Okay. We'll have an update now on the latest results. I know you're still waiting the results from your constituency in Paris, where the polls close at 8 p.m. So that's why it's taking a bit of time. Let's take a look now at the latest results. It's an interesting figure because we have an update in terms of
votes cast.
Votes cast, 25.6% for the New Popular Alliance, slightly ahead. They were neck and neck just a few hours ago. Now 25.2% for the Together coalition of Emmanuel Macron, 19.1% for the National Rally, 13.6% for the Republicans. This is obviously the votes. However, it does not translate into the projection in the number of seats, where we've seen that Emmanuel Macron's coalition is apparently going to get a majority. The big question is whether it will be an absolute majority. For this, you need to get more than 289 seats. or if it's going to be a relative majority, you see that the range of estimates is fairly broad, between 255 and 295 seats. So this is obviously going to be very different if it's closer to 250 or closer to 300. Mathieu Douaret.
Well, let's introduce Mathieu Douaret.
Yes, joins us from our Ipsos partners.
Good evening.
And so this obviously begs the question, how can you do those projections? We heard Jean-Luc Mélenchon in his speech saying all the seat projections, you can just throw them out. They're worth nothing because we're ahead. We're going to win. Explain us how this can be.
I would say he is right about something, which is that everything could still change either way. He is wrong about the fact that he's ahead in, or even NUP isn't qualified in more than, for the runoff, in more than probably 350 constituencies, which means that if they were to win an overall majority, they would have to win all of them, which is, of course,
because he's claiming 500. You're saying 350 in the number of constituencies out of 577.
Where they can reach the runoff.
Yeah.
Not win them. Right. And they could probably win only half of them, which is already good. A good result for sure. For example, as a way of comparison, les Républicains, the Republicans, who had the largest opposition group in the previous parliament, would only be in the runoff in around 110 constituencies. That is as many as they already have, and it is very unlikely that they can win all of them. So what is obvious is that these first round's results reflect the shift to the right of the presidential majority, which is that whether it keeps an overall majority or not, more seats will come from right-wing voters than in 2017. Quite obviously, this is the same scenario that happened in the first round of the presidential election. On the other hand, where the Republicans were able to save more than 100 seats, we can now see NUP saving at least, or winning actually, at least 150 seats for the left. So this is clearly an indication of the fact that, yes, indeed, Ensemble is now the center-right. What is very striking from a non-French perspective is that we should say that it is a question whether there is an overall majority or not. In German elections, you don't really care about who has the majority. You just look at what coalitions are feasible, and you consider there is a political blockade only when no coalition is politically conceivable. In our case, it's true that France is experimenting with coalition politics, just like the UK 12 years ago. But everyone knows around this table, and probably all over France, that it is more likely than the oppositions could not agree on any constructive platform, except maybe the Republicans on at least a restricted series of topics with the incumbent majority. And also, let us not...
So you're saying a grand coalition is impossible in France?
A grand coalition is impossible. A center-right coalition has just got the majority. It's obvious that there is a majority for a center-right coalition, exactly the same kind of coalition that Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel, Berlusconi or Aznar could gather.
Because what's interesting is even if the Republicans lose half of their seats, they're
still kingmakers.
Are
much more important because they could be potential allies of Emmanuel Macron.
This is really funny because what is unique in all parliamentary democracies all over the world, I would say, in the Western world in particular, is that it's the most conservative wing of the center-right coalition which will hold the balance of power, while generally speaking, the centrists are holding the balance of power. Lib Dem, FDP, etc. So we are in a very peculiar situation. But the French have to accept the idea that we are just a country like all the others. We have a center-right majority because this is the elderly people who hold the balance of power because they vote twice more than the young. The young vote for the left, but they don't vote in large numbers enough. That's the way of life. That's why Merkel was able to stick to power for so long. This is also why Boris Johnson has been re-elected.
All right, and so it's election night on France 24, and we're able to get a second opinion. It's nice when you put two pollsters, one next to the other.
I'm not a pollster. I just actually take his work and then do mine.
Oh, I see. Sounds
another
like
pollster's
it sounds like a disclaimer, Rémi.
No, I have to say that because
do you agree though that I mean it sounds a lot like what he just described sounds a lot like the whole that and obviously the Républicain is not the same as the DUP in Northern Ireland, but it sounds like we could be headed to that kind of scenario.
I think he's right. And I think that the left is more generally facing a uphill battle, like, in the next 10, 20 years. And there's a very simple reason for that. It's population is aging. And he said that it's because young people do not vote, but that is not true because when you look at the median age of the electorate, people actually voted for the presidential election is 53 years. And you might say, okay, young people didn't vote, so that's why it's so high. But if you take the entire electorate, the median age is 50, which means people over 50 have a majority in this country. If everyone voted, people over 50 would have a majority in this country.
But what about?
I completely agree. That means that even when they've got a candidate they are enthusiastic about, Obama-like, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon probably was, it's not enough.
I'm more Bernie-like than Obama, but...
Yes. LREM was sold as the party of the youth, but it's actually the party of the elderly. When you look at the numbers, it's mostly older people who vote for Macron. It's just a fact. I'm not arguing. It's no bull.
How do you get the it's not just the young, by the way. It's also the disenfranchised who never vote. How do you get these people to the polling station?
But first, I want to remind everyone that 5 years ago, Emmanuel Macron was elected as president of the young people. He was very old and reactionary in his politics and very right-wing. And he was supposed to do this big center, neither right nor left policies, and he appeared to be on the right wing of the political spectrum, actually, when you see all the policies that he implemented. And we will said that left and right doesn't matter anymore. What we've seen with the result of Jean-Luc Mélenchon at the presidential election, and then now what is happening, because it's still happening, and I think it's not over by far. I think it's just the beginning. What is happening with the New Popular Union is that people still want to retire at 60. They want increase in the minimum wage. They want the young people to study freely, to go to the university. They still are, even older people, some old people do want those things. So we have to convince them that it is possible. We have to convince them that next week what they do, if they go, or if they don't go, will change the face of the country. That's, of course, a happy battle, but we've already, I think, won a few battles, and we managed to get ahead despite all the obstacles that were in front of us. I think we can make it. We can do it.
And those
yes, we can.
The results of that survey are with Mathieu Douaré's folks at Ipsos, and again, it's bread and butter issues that rule the top three. In past, I don't know how much of a bellwether the capital has been for the rest of the country. It's France's largest city, Paris. James Andre is watching election results from throughout the four corners of Paris. We still don't have a result, by the way, for Danielle Obono's home constituency, where she's running for re-election. James, what's the latest that you have?
Well, what I can tell you for starters is that, I'm standing in front of the Les Républicains, the Republicans' HQ, and we have had one partial result that has come in. I mean, it's not in Paris, but it's Éric Ciotti, who is down south in Nice, and in fact, he was facing off with a candidate from the presidential party Ensemble, Greg Monetti, who is backed by his arch rival in the right-wing Républicain party, and that is Christian Estrosi. Well, according to preliminary results, with 40% of the vote counted, it appears that Christian Estrosi is qualified for the second round, and he's coming out first in this election. For now, once again, these are preliminary results, but he's doing 32%, and in fact, Greg Monetti is doing 25.5%. This is quite interesting because this is very much a battle for the future of Les Républicains and who will be in control. Éric Ciotti came out second in the primary for the presidential election. And for now, yes, we are watching, of course, what's going on here in Paris, still waiting for results, but with Stanislas Guérini, for example, who is indeed a senior member of La République En Marche, the presidential party, and who was facing election in the third circumscription of Paris, and also, well, two other ministers. So, yeah, watching what's going on here as far as results are concerned in the capital.
We're reporting live from Paris's 15th arrondissement. Diptyque Laurent is at the big board. Again, the picture is crystallizing, but oh so slowly when we hear how few results have come in some of those key districts.
That's right, François. We say these numbers will keep changing, but they actually haven't changed much or at all since we got the results earlier this evening. Emmanuel Macron's party on track to get about 255 to 295 seats. Jean-Luc Mélenchon's leading that left alliance. That alliance is on track to get about 150 to 190 seats. And Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party on track to get about 20 to 45 seats, well above the 15 needed to form a parliamentary group. We do have some results of individual constituencies. We have Emmanuel Macron's Minister for Solidarity, Damien Abad, who's into the second round runoff with 33% in this first round. There's also Marc Fesneau, who's the Minister for Agriculture. He's also into the second round with almost 32%. You also have Brigitte Bourguignon, Emmanuel Macron's Health Minister, who's into the second round with 32%. These races are important to watch because Emmanuel Macron has, of course, said that if his ministers don't win their seats, then they lose their ministerships. And finally, you have Fabien Roussel, the leader of the French Communist Party, also into the second round with just over 34%. François.
Diptyque Laurent, many thanks.
And we can now go to Marseille, in the port city of Marseille. Cole Stangler has been following the night with the camp of Manuel Bompard, who is the lieutenant of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He's running for the seat of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. What's the latest, Cole?
So as I've been saying earlier, we're still waiting on those results to start coming in from Marseille, which makes up you have seven legislative districts here across the city. Marseille is a very specific city. It's a very particular city, but it's also indicative of some of these sort of larger trends. And if you look at the map in Marseille, what people have been saying within the NUPES coalition is that it'd be a success if they were able to capture 4 of these 7 districts that each are pretty particular in their own way. I wanted to walk you through some of them, which tell some of these point to some of these larger national trends. So the first one we're talking about, obviously, Manuel Bompard here, the 4th district in Marseille, expected to win in a landslide. You have another district in the north, which they're expected to do well in. You have Sébastien Delogu there, running in the northern neighborhoods there, so neighborhoods that have higher rates of poverty and unemployment, big public housing towers. They're expected to do well there as well. And the question really is, are they going to win these other 2 districts you have in the city? And again, we're waiting for those results anxiously to come in soon.
Cole Stangler in Marseille, thank you very much.
Quick question, Daniel Obono. You have Marine Le Pen, who's on course for re-election. We just heard from Cole Stangler, and he's reporting from what could have been Jean-Luc Mélenchon's district. It means that over the next 5 years in Parliament, when it gets shouty during those prime minister's questions time and those government question times, you'll be hearing Marine Le Pen. You won't be hearing Jean-Luc Mélenchon at that moment.
Unless he's prime minister.
Unless he's prime minister. And I don't think we will be hearing Marine Le Pen a lot. We didn't hear from her a lot.
Why didn't he run? Why didn't he run for re-election?
Why? because he can be prime minister without being an MP. He's been an MP for the past 5 years. He's been an MEP also.
But that's neither here nor there. You've had prime ministers who are MPs a lot.
Yeah, but some are not MPs. And the point is, whether he is a prime minister or not, hopefully he will, and we'll make sure he is next week. He'll still play a leading role, and is the one who managed to get this coalition standing and hopefully winning. So he will play a leading role, and people will think that they will. A lot of people thought that they got rid of him after the first round of the presidential election. He showed that he was still the man that could talk to millions of people, and people heard him. Some of the people heard him, and I think a lot of people can still go to vote next week thanks to the role and is playing and will be playing in this in between rounds of the election. So whether he's an MP or not, he will be prime minister if people go to vote, and he'll still be playing a huge role in the next years.
Daniel Obono, and we wish you the best of luck as we wait again for your constituency
yes.
To publish its returns. What are you expecting results?
Well, I expect
minutes, hours.
I don't know. I think a couple of maybe in the next hour.
Next hour,
yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll be watching that one closely. Best of luck to you. I want to thank as well Mathieu Douaré, Rémi Lou for being with us. François Picard and Mark Perlman. Our coverage of election night continues here on France 24 and on France24.com.
In the middle of the desert, the Arar checkpoint resumes activity on the border between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. The two countries had interrupted relations following the 1990 invasion of Kuwait. But 30 years later, the gates finally open, if only slightly.